because they're like, it works and people don't mind. It's so quick.
We're going to go live,
That's
boys.
usually what it is for me.
Let's do it. At least he gave us some notice.
Yeah, right.
So let it be written.
That was the perfect time to tell me.
So let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors. I gave you some notice about going live, so I didn't do a Diaz cast where Rob is giving us his theatrical thesis on the end of episode 3. And then you go, and we're live. We are joined today by Lloyd Collins. Lloyd's a game designer. He is also the creator of Iskloft, which is an awesome grimdark setting that is Viking-centric. And Lloyd is also the creator of JarlDM, the YouTube channel. So check out those things. We're going to talk about a game mechanic loop that I'm trying to figure out for a superhero RPG called Superheroic. And so please hang out, ask us questions. We will be checking the chat. And then I'm going to just jump right in and kind of explain the system. So the mechanical loop that we're trying to achieve with Superheroic is to try to solve a problem that I found. I've read probably cover to cover now 3 full superhero RPGs, and all of them feel like RPGs that happen to have people in costumes within them.
Yeah.
The vibe of like what I read, and because I've read a lot of comics, there's a feel that you get when you're reading a comic book of all kinds, whether it's capes and tights, noir drama, whatever. And I think designing a rule set that is light and fast, but also mimics that, I haven't seen it done like the way that I want to play it. So the first thing I'm going to throw out there, and then we can kind of discuss this, rather than failing in this game, you're a superhero. So, and we can caveat, and I'll explain all these things, but if there are a couple of muggers running away with a purse, you don't roll to see if you stop the mugger. You roll, and if you miss the roll, there are consequences, but you still stop the mugger. So the idea is eliminating failure except for, and there are going to be ways that you can fail, and I'll explain that, but that's the first thing we decided to do is if you roll and you miss, it's not, oh, sorry, Spider-Man, you don't stop the mugger, because we've seen that 0 times in every comic ever, unless it mattered. So there are ways that we can make it matter. So what are your thoughts on that off the cuff, both of you guys? Lloyd, maybe you first, since you haven't heard that yet. What do you think?
I think like the binary success fail that you get with D&D is not that fun when you are good at a thing. So if you're the knight and you've spent your whole life learning how to be a knight and to go jousting, and then you go to the joust and you like trip over your horse, like that feels bad. Like, why would that happen? Because you rolled a bad dice? It's nonsense, right? Agreed. So the thing that you're good at, you should succeed at most of the time. And I think like this, like a superhero stopping muggers is barely a task for a superhero, right? It's the vampire getting food in Vampire. It's like that. It's there for filler and to give you the impression of who the person is, and it's like a narrative thing. But there's no actual mechanical fear of you not succeeding at this task, right? Superman. Right. There's no situation where Superman doesn't stop a mugger,
right?
Unless that mugger happens to be made of kryptonite or something, right? Like it's not gonna happen. It can't happen, right? So I think it's totally fine to be like, you are good at this. You won't mess it up.
That's it.
Yeah.
And go ahead. I was just going to say, that's cool. That's cool that that's your first response, because that's kind of the internal discussion that we had where it's like, we have to eliminate that because the knight and the horse example is perfect. But James, go ahead.
Just Spider-Man is my favorite example of the mugger because there is one case where he doesn't stop a mugger and his uncle dies. And that's why he's Spider-Man. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I thought
he would have stopped him if it didn't make him who he was, so, but that's what's most important is I think that an acceptance, and it's kind of slowly happening, but an acceptance that movies and TVs are good, but you do generally have a pretty good idea of whether or not somebody's going to die or whether or not they're going to miss this shot or whether or not. It's extremely rare in movies and television that you're truly concerned that the thing they're doing might fail. You're more concerned about how it will go. Okay, we know that they've decided to crash the ship into the other ship. Who's going to die because of it? Making the success fail part of like the main gameplay loop like D&D, I feel like removes so many ways for us to see situations like that. Because if it's whether or not we crash the ship into the other ship, we don't get to see what happens after. So yeah, just make it an inevitability and then see how people roll when they're dying because they're getting sucked out of an airlock, right? Like so.
Sure. Yeah.
I think there's like a scale thing too, because like some encounters when you're a superhero are going to be fail or pass. They're going to be intense and important, but stopping a guy in the street who's stolen a handbag is not one of them, right?
Yep,
like,
exactly.
So there are times when, and I don't know, I've been thinking about this too for games that I've been making, is like, there are times when you should just do the thing. Like if you're the steward of your noble house and you have to do accounting, then you should succeed at that task, right? Like there's no way that you mess that up. Or like if you're the trade merchant guy and you have to make a deal trading, then you do it. You just do it. But there's a different scale. So like most tasks are fine, but the big ones, the difficult ones, that's when you can kind of consider like, okay, maybe this doesn't go the way we want.
Yeah, that's perfect. And that's exactly how we have it. So right now, and because the game's a work in progress, we'll definitely, use terms that'll probably change, or, if we come up with better terms even on the fly, that's fine. Right now, there are non-heroic challenges and there are heroic challenges. A non-heroic challenge is exactly what you described, the muggers or whatever number of things that we see the heroes doing that, like you say, it just doesn't take effort. Then there are heroic challenges, which is, Green Goblin shows up who can absolutely kill Spider-Man. Doomsday shows up and can pummel Superman. And the difference is those non-heroic challenges, as it's written now, can't take away what we're calling resilience. And that's basically just your stay alive ability, So stopping the muggers, they can't hurt you. And we'll talk about what that play loop looks like. And so, what's the risk then? So, but if Green Goblin shows up, you can't just automatically succeed. If you miss him. You don't hit him, and he can hit you and take away your resilience. Go ahead.
Sorry, another thing to that very point specifically, and something in the chat. O'Neill Flynn says epic fights would definitely be a pass or fail on rolls, even at a consequence or a success on the pass-fail roll. What's important about Green Goblin is there's a chance that if he could kill Spider-Man, he would leave him alive and instead kill civilians, depending on how he feels. You know what I mean? So in a sense, I just wanted to point out that sometimes resilience going to 0 also is not you dying, because that's not the worst thing that can happen to a hero. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a little more abstract than that. I just wanted to mention that because I sometimes forget that we are a bit further away from D&D than other people might be. And so sometimes there are paradigms that are hard to shake, I guess. So, but sorry, continue.
And so the way that I'm kind of seeing it is this, and this is where I have to kind of talk it out, because I don't have the exact thing, but I have the thing that I think, oh, that feels kind of neat. Let's see if that can happen. So the way that you interact with the world, and I won't describe like character creation yet and all that. We'll just say it is a roll under mechanic. And when you roll, you have these different characteristics, and they're so like might, agility, intellect, all the things you see on like a Fleer 1990s Marvel superhero card kind of stuff. And depending on what your score is in that, you have a die that's related to it, right? So let's say if your score is a 15, and these are fluid, I haven't decided what's what yet, but let's say your score is a 15. If you roll under and succeed, you roll your impact. And so rather than dealing damage, it's not just about fighting. So if I have an intellect score of 15 and I'm trying to figure out how to outsmart you or how to hack the computer, I basically roll. Oh, great, I roll under. I know that my impact die for my intellect is a D6, so now I roll my D6, and I can have an impact positively or negatively on an outcome. So here's the idea. If Spider-Man's trying to stop the muggers, and this is where I thought, I don't want it to get too up in the clouds, but I think it could be kind of interesting and kind of perpetuate a storytelling system. If I roll under, so I'm successful. All right, great. I then roll my impact, which, let's say it's a D6. Okay, cool. 3 impact. That was a positive impact. But I'm thinking of, instead of it making it happen here, it sort of affects a meta track of the game. So if I fail, I still have to roll impact. So I don't fail the task, but there's like negative juju that happens, whether that's collateral damage or my identity is partially revealed, like whatever it is. So same task. Oh, I roll over the 15. You still have to roll impact. You still have impact on everything. It's just whether or not it's the outcome you want or not. So then you're like, all right, cool. You roll. Oh, I got a 6. And that 6 goes on the negative impact bar. And so it's this kind of thing. And I thought it would be kind of cool to have maybe like you play like 2 or 3 scenes. And then depending on how that positive or negative impact has happened, it informs the climax battle, basically. Like, did you do well or did you do crappy up to that point, and make that inform it? So I don't know. What are your thoughts on all that? I know it's a lot, but it's kind of the feel I'm going for.
I was going to say real quick, let me say first, Lloyd, if you have any questions about it, because Tim and I have talked about it a lot, and I realize that there may be some details he left out, but I can't identify them because I know what they are. So do you have any questions about anything we said?
Yes.
Yeah.
So when you're making your guy, you have stats, right?
You do, yeah. It's a standard array.
And each stat has
based on Black Hack as well.
Okay. And
it's changed so much that, yeah. But go ahead.
Each stat has a die attributed to it?
So each number has a die. So it's like, instead of it being a +3 because you have a 16, you get a certain die. So,
okay,
does that make sense? So your stat is your impact. So if you have an 18, you're going to roll maybe a D12 because you're like really high. So rather than doing a +3 or a +4, it's roll under and then you deal impact or do impact. So each number from 10 through 20 or whatever would be has a die from low to high.
Okay. Just trying to get my head around it.
Right. So what I'm trying to do
is there a way, I guess maybe this is not what you're thinking of, but is there a way to just have the dice and not have the stat? Like I don't necessarily get why you have both the stat and the die that tells you what the stat is.
So think of it as replacing damage with an abstracted thing called impact. So your die is to roll under to see if you succeed or fail. And then the impact is
die, right, in the sense that you have strength is going to be, but you're saying the different stats, you're rolling a different die. So what it sounds like you're describing is, and I didn't know this change, and that's why I said what I said earlier. What it sounds like you're saying is if you have a power, it sounds like Lloyd's saying you have stats, right? In like D&D and Black Hack, you have +2 and +3. What it sounds like you're saying is, say, strength, if that was one, is a D8. And if you do a strength thing, you roll a D8. Is that what you're saying?
No. Sorry, I apologize. So the way that you do it is you still roll the D20 as the resolution mechanic. And it's a roll under. And the way that you do it is, might, agility, intellect. You have a standard array. And then when you make your character, you can add plus here and this and plus. But depending on your ability score, you have an amount of impact that you can have. So someone who's not very smart only gets a D4 of impact. So if they're in a situation where it's like the game master says, all right, roll intellect, you make the roll and you succeed, you can still only do a D4 impact because you're not that smart. Whereas someone who is a genius might have, a D12 and some sort of a power where they get to roll the die twice and choose the higher number so that they feel like they're very brainy, if that makes sense. Is that a little clearer? It's like a damage die.
Damage die.
Yes.
Each stat has a damage die.
Yeah.
That is tied intrinsically to the number.
How much stuff you can do with the stat, basically. So if you're super strong, if you're the strongest person, then you can do more with a successful strength than somebody who's not so strong.
Correct.
The Hulk can do a shit ton with a good, successful strength roll, but Doctor Strange can't.
Correct.
Right?
Exactly.
He's going to do less, certainly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep. And so those basically right now those are wrapped up into archetypes. So if there's a heavyweight, they would have if you get +2 to your might And then if you throw your 15 in there from the standard array, now you're at a 17. And then they probably even would have like an ability like once per scene, you can choose to succeed at a might test where you would otherwise fail. So like you can just lift the thing automatically once in a, powerful scene or a heroic scene that would be dangerous of that kind of thing.
One of the things you got me thinking of there, which is what I really love about Spire at the moment, is that you have lots of abilities that just let you do a thing. You don't have to roll for it. You just do it, right? So I think that's something great to include more and more as I play. I used to kind of think like, oh, that's lame. I want to roll the dice and see how it goes. But more and more, I think like, well, if I'm the Hulk, I can lift a car.
100%.
No matter what the situation
it's
is.
what you do with the car that matters.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like,
The challenge isn't you doing the thing you're good at. It's like the impact, which is a good word to use, I think, actually, of what you do and how it affects the world and what you're doing.
Cool.
Exactly.
And to be, I was just going to say, to be clear, that's exactly how we're writing the powers. So that's one of the biggest downsides of many of the superhero RPGs that I found is they try to balance the powers, and powers aren't balanced in comics. No. It just doesn't work.
Statistically,
Right. And statistically,
that's the other thing,
this person does
this
damage.
They try to do it.
Because it's in combat.
Yeah.
So if you are Cyclops, your power and where it's nested and how it's worded and all that stuff. But basically for now, I'll just call it optic blasts. We might explode that out into like energy powers, and then you choose narratively what that is, but you can just shoot energy. That's what you do. You can destroy structures and vehicles, and that's just what it's going to say. You can just blow stuff up. Then underneath it, there are specifics to what it is in a heroic challenge. You can't just do that to someone who's as powerful as you. So now you could miss, or they could deflect. So you can do the thing, but when it's against Magneto, it's not just as easy as pew, 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 pew. But for everything else, it's just pew, pew, pew. And you just do the things. You blow the stuff up. You fly wherever you want, all that stuff. I think it's very important.
That's what I was going to say, is for challenges, because we haven't really talked about, getting into that part of the loop, was what I was going to say. That's the perfect time to say when there is a challenge in front of heroes, they tell you how they use their powers to overcome it, and then based on how they roll, if they have to, if it's challenging enough or not, they might have accidentally hurt somebody while they did it, or again, released an identity or be seen, or it's a different kind of thing where it's like you are worrying about the things a real superhero would worry about. Mm-hmm. You can shoot an ice bridge anywhere, but it's there now and it might be in somebody's way, or you might hit somebody. That matters more. You caught the mugger, but are people more mad at you now that you did it or less?
Like a huge concern in superhero media is, or should be, collateral damage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Like it's something that comes up in The Boys a lot. Is like, is it worth calling a superhero here for the amount of damage they will do to like the surrounding region by their arrival? Like even the way that like Homelander takes off, there's like this subsonic boom when he, and like he has to get people to step away from him before he does that, or they'll just be liquefied or whatever. So it's like, not to that extreme in a more heroic game, but like if you're chasing after the muggers and you use like an energy blast and slice through a building, you get the muggers, but also you've like destroyed a building or like blown up a car or something. Like that's the difficulty, right, of the non-heroic challenges, is being reasonable and like not destroying the world around you, or like moral quandaries, I guess, a bit more.
Exactly. And potentially given the chance to, they're getting away after the bank robbery, blow up their getaway car. Well, I can't do that. I can't kill these people. I can't, you know what I mean? Like, no, you can. You're a superhero. You can blow up their getaway car. Is that the superhero you are? Like that's what it becomes, the game is about. So, yeah.
Right. And so to kind of give you the mechanic of what that would look like, and then we'll jump to the chat. I know there are plenty of awesome people hanging out, and I want to make sure to hit some questions or comments in there. So as of this point, to kind of just talk it through, using the muggers and they're robbing the bank. So the way I imagine it now is it is abstracted so that there's not one stat block for each mugger and all this. It's an event that's happening. So the way that a non-heroic challenge would be written out would be like, several bank robbers are robbing a bank. If you go, well, actually, James, you're Spider-Man. Okay. You see, and I describe the scene. Okay. What do you do, Spider-Man?
I would immediately swing there to the bank and then probably look in and see, can I get a 20 on the bank robbers? Maybe talk to a police officer outside and see what's happening, depending on how recently it happened.
Sure. And all that, you would roll for none of that. You would roll for
exactly.
None of that, right?
I'd describe where I was at the time, and I swing, and I get there.
And all that stuff's totally free. And then the bank robbers come crashing out, and there's 4 of them. They're wearing ridiculous fake rubber Green Goblin masks, and they're all getting into this old yellow van. What do you do?
But they have hostages.
But they have hostages. So Lloyd, what superhero are you that on the scene? Don't say Dr. Manhattan.
I simply unmake them.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
I was gonna say let's keep Spider-Man. It sounds funny.
Yeah,
but
let's stick with
let's
Spider-Man.
keep one person and we're just
okay. That's fine. That's fine. So they have a teller and the old man guard, and they're getting into the car.
I would encourage the cops to let them go, and I'll follow them on the rooftops. And when they turn in a certain place, I'll use like a web wall to stop their car so that they can't go further down that road.
That's perfect.
Something like that.
And this cop knows you, and they're like, sure thing, Spider-Man. Like, they know the deal. So you are able to do that, and the car just gets stuck into your web wall. Go ahead and give me an agility test. And so it's a roll under. Your agility as Spider-Man is probably like really high. Yeah, sorry. So let's say your agility is like probably 18 or 20. It's like super high. So give me a roll under.
Okay,
5.
and so
Okay, so you roll under. Now, as Spider-Man, because it's that high, your actual impact die is a D12. So you'd roll a D12 for me.
6.
Perfect. So you have 6 impact on this scene. Positive, because you've succeeded. Now, if you would have failed, let's pretend you didn't roll under. You would still have impact. You still roll the impact die, but now you have a negative impact, whatever that looks like. And so what I'm trying to figure out is there immediate consequences, or is it more fun to have immediate, and now as the game master, I write down under the negative impact, I tally up 6. You know what I mean? And then I'm kind of keeping track of all the craziness that you're doing. But should I make it immediate? I don't want it to be so often that every time you do one single thing, the sky falls. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you stopped the muggers. Someone found out your identity again, But that's the general play loop. Now I don't know what to do with the positive or the negative impact.
And that's the thing. Let me back up. Let me describe the scene of the van, right?
Okay, yep.
The van's running away. Then Lloyd rolls. You go, okay, you're tailing them. The streets are clear for some reason. You know what I mean? They found this way. They're able to get away. They're probably on their way to the hideout. You won't have much time. What are you going to do? Oh, I set up a web wall. You do all your rolls. Okay, you've succeeded. You make the web wall, and you have the impact. The web wall, you describe what happens. Oh, there's this is a comic book, right? I want everybody to remember. There's a woman and the baby stroller walking across the street. This is the last chance you have to do it. So you start making this web wall, and and now this exact part I'm about to say is what happens whether or not you succeed on the die. And the web wall is stretching. You're adding more and more, and they're gunning it. You can hear the tires spinning, and they're trying to get out of this, and it stops just shy of the woman, who's now cowering and cowering in fear. You've immediately applied what happened. Now, if it was bad, right, you probably wouldn't make it a woman, because I'm not about to, in this comic, make the van barrel through a woman and a baby. But instead, they might crash, and now you have muggers or bank robbers running one way, and hostages that are now probably hurt that you should stay with. That's your negative impact. You know what I mean? Like, right. You immediately decide what happened based on that.
Right. And you told the cops, I've got this, and you didn't have this,
Yeah. And that might get marked down too.
Right. So like your public persona of always gets the job done, like is no longer that true because you let them get away, and also people are injured, for example.
I love it. Like, I love it. No. And so
I do like the idea though as well, because I think, at least in my head, a session of this game looks like introduce the thing that will happen at the end near the start, and then like several scenes of superheroes doing shit, and then you get to the point at the end where you fight the bad guy. or
exactly
interact with.
Yeah, stop
right?
the
So,
plan or yeah.
right. So then I think each impact can lead into that scene, and before that big scene happens at the end, you look, okay, well, you've got plus 14 impact and also minus 11. So you've got a net of like plus 3 impact. Here are some things you can do to set up this last scene as an up, right? So here's like some ideas of things that you can come into this scene with because you've done overall well in the adventure. Or if you've done really badly and you've had lots of negative impact, the bad guy has a bunch of additional narrative like things that they can bring in, you know?
And that's exactly how I think. Yeah, I that's great that you said that, because that's how I think right now in my head it is. I just don't know. So do you think that would be cool?
I think so. Yeah, I think it could be fun, because then it gives weight to the little encounters that they don't actually necessarily feel in the moment.
Yeah.
So like stopping these bank robbers, like, yeah, that's important, but like on a larger scale, what you're doing is all of this stuff is working towards stopping the big bad at the end.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
It's all working towards this one goal. So it kind of gives intensity and like gravitas to all the minor tasks as well.
Can I just say one thing real quick, James, before you jump in, and then I'll let you go?
Yeah, we just need to get to the chat. But say whatever, yeah.
So
said already earlier that.
Well, I said once we finish this play loop, but but the reason why I like that you roll impact every time is because as a hero you should have impact. It should matter every time what you're doing. And think about it, if you botch something and you roll a 12 on the impact die, you have now messed up really badly, and it's like, oh, it might encourage you to say, well, what else can we do to try to help? Like, I know that this scene is coming. Is there anything else we can do to try to stop or set up or other crimes like? It kind of perpetuates a play loop of, feeling like whatever you do, it matters. So,
yeah, because you have to be a hero in that sense. And I think that is the important thing. Is it's another sort of paradigm that I think will need to be shaken off for some people, where the impact will sometimes be a thing that you look at and vaguely decide why it matters, right? If you have high impact, you go, okay, in this situation, something needs to happen. How's the impact for this particular thing looking? Oh, it's real high. Okay, so they're doing well, and it wouldn't be bad. You know what? This would be a little bit easier, and they might have a leg up. That's not mechanical, but that's okay, because we trust the GM to look at it and go, they've been, having negative impacts a lot. Every time they do something this session, it seems like it's not going well. I need to make them understand that matters. I need to make them feel that. They're not going to lose the game. It just makes the story more interesting. So yeah, no, I think that's the best way to do it. And you feel like a hero, where it's like, hey, job's never done, man. It's time to go do the next thing.
Exactly. Right. Next issue. We're a periodical after all.
But somebody mentioned specifically about the D12, and so I was like, they were mostly saying very specific things to what we were talking about, and so I just wanted.
No, that's great. So I'll jump into the chat here. We have some really good comments. Thanks for hanging out. Consequences is a good one for mundane events. Excuse me. Yeah, I think it feels cool to do what we kind of mentioned, where you don't fail at the thing, like Lloyd said. You do the thing. It's just that there are ripples, which is very superhero-y.
And that was something Midarn said. It reminds him a little bit in Fiasco how you win a scene and dice. And you then you get a pool of those, and at the end you get to say something about what happened, and it calculates. It is very similar to that, where we're banking a resource to then later say, what does this pool look like now, and what does that mean?
Yeah.
So it is exactly like that.
Remind me, bring that up again once we get through the chat, because then I want to talk about the what a powerful challenge or a heroic challenge would look like. And then, okay. So Ben said die stats are a thing from the Savage Worlds RPG, I think. Oh, yeah, I think you're right, where you actually have the die is the stat.
Is the stat, yeah.
That's what I was thinking of. It's like, if you have a stat that just represents a die, then you should just use the die. But it's it's not that. So.
Yeah,
right. It's a little kind of, it's all connected in a little triangle. But I'm trying to eliminate the need for weapons and figuring out equipment and all that, and just making it so that you have a 15, you roll this. This is your impact. You can narratively make it whatever you want. You're the Punisher with machine guns, and we'll talk about powers too, because Bloat. So O'Neill also said that Bloat Games did one where you roll a D20 and a D6, D20 for the mechanics, but the D6 determine the hindrance or benefit of the action. Well, that's kind of neat. On a 1.
That's like hyperspace.
Oh, right.
Right.
And
You've got the force die.
The force die, right. The destiny die, legally dissimilar.
Destiny die.
Heavyweight reminded me of the series Hard Magic by Larry Correia. I have never read Hard Magic.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen that one.
Good series to check out. I will check it out. I do like Larry Correia. Overworked CNA says, you guys are the best. Thanks to you, I started knowing absolutely nothing about tabletop RPGs, and now I'm playing my first D&D campaign. Congratulations. That is some of the best news. Like, I love that for you. And please check in as often as you want. Let us know how it's going. Come and gush about your campaign. We love to hear about that kind of stuff. Matt Pronomicon says, D12, the underrated fave. D12s are just fun. They're just chunky little nuggets. Oh, Ben has a pretty good idea here. He says you could use thresholds. Impact 1 through 5 is a minor distant effect, 6 through 14 is a moderate soon to occur effect, and 15 to 20 is an immediate effect. Good or bad. Yeah, we could play around with that. And then Bedarn says you could have an encounter budget to spend against the impact die result. So the GM attributes a certain amount of challenge to a scene. And that is the direction we're headed. Shaking out the math so that it all feels really good and flows and has this little economy for sure. Krimtaku says, rolling 1 die for big impact actions feels quite random for me. What made you choose something like a D12? And then, James, I think you answered that.
Yeah, just that idea that it was a decision that is made on the character sheet.
Something else that's really important is we have not talked about powers and how powers come into play. And rather than go down that rabbit hole, if you have a power, it will very likely add impact. So that is just the normal hero running around. You know, we talked about Cyclops as an example. The optic blast of the power, but he's still an apex human being who's very fit and everything. So a power will very likely, because that's a very good point. You don't want to just feel like, oh, all right, you're 3 impact there with your optic blast. It would be things, and this was just in a note on my phone. I have no actual game design theory behind this other than the powers would have underneath where it says in heroic challenges, something like add +5 impact to destroy objects, or it's something that would make it feel like you're blowing things up with your optic blasts, where you just get to add it. Now, make it optional so that if you roll negatively, you don't have to add it. But that's a good distinction. You don't want Spider-Man to roll a 1 and not feel very Spider-Man.
Yeah, and I think more specifically, something we talked about, Tim, I believe it's still similar to this, would be that the goal, and again, this is like not something most games put rules on, and they wouldn't really be rules, but these things would be explained so the game works. But the idea that when a bad guy is doing something, like one example we were using is Magneto is like picking up cars and throwing them at you. Mm-hmm. You as the hero decide, or as the player especially, I go, all right, Magneto's throwing a car at you. What do you do? If you're Cyclops, you might blow up the car. If you're Spider-Man, your Spidey senses go off and you go, it's different what happens, but like you have to dodge a car. How does your person dodge a car? And the game will be very much like that, because so often instead it's not in D&D, it's do you find the clue in the book, not how do you find the clue in the book. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like a bad roll might mean, and it's just that very slight difference.
It's like you're doing it. How do you do it? Not do you do it?
For most challenges.
For most challenges, yeah. And if Magneto,
that's why. Yeah.
No, you go ahead.
It just the impact I think people can get can be afraid that the impact can be afraid of what might happen to the impact, but because it is this abstract thing, it's almost like we don't have to worry about the math of it, like going too high or something. I always imagine it like in Quidditch in Harry Potter. When you get the snitch, you get like plus however many points. There's sometimes maybe going to be a thing where like, no, if you hit Magneto, in effect, your impact has gone up to 1,000,000 because it's ended. You know what I mean? Like, it's not the sort of thing, it's not so limiting that if your impact is 99 and you need 1 more, but you've, routed Magneto, you don't play another round. You know what I mean? Like, I just want to make clear to everybody, it's a framework, not like, well, you need 1 more, guys, sorry. And that's just so important to the system, I think.
Yeah, and there was a really good comment in here by Shannon Langhart. What if you have an impact pool that when you fill up, you then need to roll on a table that can determine what effects happen in the world? So I don't want it to get too complex so that when you prep for this game, you have to make a bunch of tables. That's the one thing, and I think we can do a lot of that work, but I had a similar idea. Let me know how this hits you. That you could do some sort of a D100 roll, and then you add the number, like Lloyd, like you said, like if it's negative 10 but positive 15, and then you end up with 5, you add 5 to the roll. Now, the reason why I don't really like that is because then it's still swingy and random, and you could still roll the worst thing. So I kind of nixed the rolling aspect. I like what you're saying about the tables, Shannon, but the way that I think I would handle it is if I did do a table, because I want it to feel like it's a choice that you did earn those things. If you have 10 impact, you can choose anything worth 10 or lower on the good chart, and the GM can choose anything worth 10 or lower on the bad chart, and it's just cool. It could be generic stuff, or it could be stuff that you write for this particular scene that you really want in there, kind of like that. I don't know how that feels.
The bad guy is prepared for your specific power, or one of your specific powers,
and keep it really general. Yeah.
That sort of stuff I think can work really well. I also just think that the lightsaber duel stuff from Hyperspace works super well for like any narrative-based big fight between superheroes, because that's what Jedi fights are, right? They're superhero fights.
They are, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Like where your success is building towards something, and their successes are building towards something that leads to some sort of climax. Because I don't know what it looks like to fight a bad guy, like a big bad in this game. Do you know yet what that would look like? Is it going to be like, I want to do a thing, I roll my dice, and I get impact for it? Or
so, as of now, that is milky, but there's another element that I think... So, I'll say it this way. Big scenes, usually they'll probably be like 1 per game, are, as of now, they start off as an outcome bar. And the outcome bar is middled at 0, and it can go positive 30 or negative 30. On one side of the outcome bar, it's Magneto rips the bridge away and sinks it into the ocean. On the other side of the outcome bar, it's Magneto is stopped. And so within that, there are heroic challenges like Magneto in there. And then there are non-heroic challenges like teetering school bus, where you're still going to succeed, but, how does that go? And then the idea is you can use your action to pew Magneto, because they're a heroic challenge and you are. And the way it works is, as of now, they have resilience, which is your overall health. It's mental, physical, spiritual, like the whole 9. So you could burn your abilities just pummeling Magneto, but that doesn't stop necessarily him from doing the thing. So you have to decide, is it better, do we all just, punch, shoot, or you can narratively describe, all right, this, and you can come up with anything you want. I'm going to do this to stop this part of what you described in the scene. All right, roll. Boom. Then you roll your impact, but instead of it going toward the abstracted bar, it now literally goes to an outcome bar. So now you have, okay, great, boom. And then there are different things that happen at different marks. So like if you knock it over into the positive, if you get it to plus 10, this good thing happens and you gain ground in the scene. If you knock it to 20, this good thing. If you knock it to negative 10, this bad thing happens, like a piece of the bridge collapses. That's kind of how
it's it is. A really good like narrative idea that the big fight, you're not trying to fight the bad guy, you're trying to stop them doing the thing they're doing.
Exactly.
Right? Because it's never the case that like, okay, we're going to go kick the crap out of Magneto. That's never the plan.
Right.
The plan is we have to stop Magneto doing the thing that he's doing. Or we don't want to beat up Thanos, we want to get the glove, right? Like
100%.
There's a job that we have to do to stop them doing their plan. We don't have to like go beat them up, because you can't usually. The bad guy is too strong to fight 1-on-1 or even 3-on-1. That's kind of the point. But they're doing some terrible task, some evil plan, and you're trying to stop the plan, not stop them necessarily. Like sometimes stopping them is the way you stop to do the plan, but actually it's whatever they're trying to achieve that you're trying to stop, not them physically being alive.
Yep. And that feels very comic booky.
Yeah. That's the important thing is in comic books. Like, for example, I think Age of Ultron, Avengers, especially using a movie because most people know it. That's a great example because that's your challenge. He's raising a part of the planet into the air and he's going to drop it and it's going to cause problems. You can beat up Thanos, or not Thanos, you can beat up Ultron and you can take him to a different place and you can teleport him to the netherworld and it doesn't matter. This area is falling. That's what's important, is your goal is, the point is to give the players problems to solve with powers that are not just beating up a person. Because there is a scene in Age of Ultron where they beat the crap out of Ultron and it doesn't matter much.
Yeah.
But it's a cool scene. But that's because it's comic books, and that's what's interesting. I think that in a game like this, you actually have to give more structure, because if people fall into the patterns they're used to, which is totally fair and human, the game won't work. Because if you just have them fight Magneto, it'll feel like not great. They can't win. I don't know. You can see how that would be bad. So yeah, I think that is a super important thing. I just wanted to put a point on how it looks in comics and that you just base it on that, you know?
Yeah, and to be clear too, in DC and Marvel comics, and Dark Horse and Image, some of the other ones, very, very different. I'm gonna build the system so you can play whatever you want, but it's rare that a hero or a villain dies. So you can die in this game, but it's extremely rare. It's an event when a hero dies in a comic most of the time, or a villain. They don't just kill villains lightly, like you say. They're knocked out. So in this game, the default state when you hit 0 resilience is you're knocked out. Unless you explicitly play a game where it's very deadly and gritty, you could absolutely. So if you were going to run a Punisher game, there would be a variant rule of like, hey, you can die. When you hit 0 resilience, whatever, blah, 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 you're dead.
Right. It's also the case that superheroes don't usually want to kill the bad guy. They want to help redeem them or something, right?
Correct.
So your goal is really like, okay, we're going to murder Magneto. Like, that's never the goal. They don't want to kill Magneto. They want to stop him doing the evil thing.
Exactly.
Right?
So, slight Endgame spoilers here. So, well, huge. Avengers Endgame spoilers here. So if you haven't seen Avengers Endgame and you plan on watching it, I want to talk about something Lloyd mentioned because I think it's really important, and then I'm going to go to the chat. But the final scene of Endgame, where everyone is trying to get the Infinity Gauntlet to a spot. That's the whole goal. That is what the bar would be. So you'd have the outcome bar, and on one side it would be Thanos gets the Infinity Gauntlet and snaps again. On the other side, it's, the Infinity Gauntlet is saved. Now, you could still do the thing. Like that.
Yeah, real quick. The one thing and I hate to be this pedantic.
No, please, because I'm not good at that part of it. Of like what to make the.
I would say Thanos gets it back, but he doesn't snap, because that would be the next thing we have to deal with, right? Because that's in the movie.
Good call. That's actually really good. Gotcha. You keep the glove away from Thanos. Got it. So on one side of its 30 impact, you secure the Infinity Gauntlet and the gems.
You get it to the van, yeah.
Yeah. The other side, Thanos gets it back. And so the way that we would have the system is that then inside of that, there are other challenges. You have Thanos, who is a heroic challenge, who can obviously wreck shop and beat up the heroes and do the thing. But then there are other things that would be both. Maybe there's a heroic challenge that's like the children of Thanos, like Proxima Midnight and all those, But then there would be other things like grunts. So you can still stop these grunts, but it's not the main goal. You know what I mean? But the way I was kind of trying to design it is, if you choose to stop the grunts, it still does impact to the scene. Because I don't want to put a bunch of stuff in the scene and then it have no purpose, if that makes sense. So kind of giving options of like, then this is going on over here, this is going on over here, this is going on over here. What do you want to do? You can do your own thing. Or you can do one of the, I want to try to do X and Y down here. And then you roll, that kind of thing, you deal impact. So does that feel like it works? Does it sound like it works?
Yeah, I also think somebody in the chat just said that there's an issue with having goals or road markers pre-planned. I actually really disagree. I think like knowing the stakes in a scene is really useful. And I also think more and more that like zooming out and talking about the game as a group and then playing the game is really useful. So like, okay, this is the deal. You succeed, this is what we're getting. You fail, this is what we're getting. That's really useful, I think, actually, most of the time when I'm playing games. So like, sort of keep in mind what the point is and what the goal is and where you're going towards. And I think this was a really good job of that, of like, because it's also really useful to know as you get closer to one end or the other what the scene looks like. So if it's get the gauntlet or Thanos gets the gauntlet, then you know as you're like closer to one end what the fight looks like and what the scene looks like. It's getting scarier and scarier because he's almost got it. Or the other way, we're feeling like we almost have it, you know? Like it's useful to have that scale, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing, is having very clear goals for players allows them to do what you prepped. Like that's the most important thing, is this concept is underutilized. But if I tell you, we're on the battlefield now, I tell you Thanos's, minions are trying to get the gauntlet, you have to get it to the back of the van for whatever. Okay, great. I go to the next player's turn and they say, okay, I kill a grunt. All right, sounds good. Negative impact to the getting it to the van. You know what I mean? Like you make the players, you railroad them by going, okay, if you don't want to lose, you have to do what I set out, because that's what the bad guy's doing. That's every movie and television show ever. They throw you into it and they go, you don't have a choice. You can walk away, but we know you're not going to, or you can do this thing. So I just want to say that about the markers, where if you imagine the path to the van, I don't remember all of them from the movie, but there's 3 or 4 encounters that happen. Yeah. Imagine those like encounters in D&D with all these things we've talked about. Oh, an angel or the Pegasus flies in or whatever and gets you, and you get part of the way there and you do a challenge on that, and then somebody shoots you out of the air. You haven't lost. You're still on your way to the van, but you're just over here now. And now there's another thing in your way. It's this funny thing where if you just tell people, they say, I want to go to the van. And you go, okay, this is in your way. All right, we did that. All right, well, you're closer to the van, but now this is in your way. That's the loop. You know what I mean? And then there's the impact and stuff, and you get that later, and that's the more complicated. But at its base level, you know what the players are going to do. Or they just kill grunts and then lose. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's okay.
Yeah, and I think...
Yeah,
go ahead.
It's good to kind of... particularly in a game like this where you have so much power, right? A superhero is unbelievably powerful. It's really good to like focus in on like, okay, yeah, you can murder grunts. You can fight and win that part easily, but that's not the point, because there's a job you have to do. And if you don't do the job, then there's a sort of fail state for the world. And whether that's like for the actual world or for your personal experience, like they're running away with the person you love, or they are whatever, are going to negatively affect the world in some way, even if it's not destroy the world. Like there's a thing you have to do, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to beat up bad guys to do the thing. Like there's a job. It's almost like a heist or something. Like you have to do the thing. That's what your job is. It's not to show off how cool you are at fighting, even though you might have to do that. That's not the end game situation. It's not just about fighting. It's about doing the thing.
Right, and I feel like, and I'll get to the chat because there are some really good points in there. I feel like one of the things that this also does is, and James, you called it out, movies and television, we accept this readily. Oh, that person has a weapon and they're going to use it unless someone stops them. It's just, that's the thing, So when I don't think that this is taking away agency, it's just giving you something to point your agency at. That's why you can do whatever you want. So if I say, okay, get the gauntlet to the van, like James said, it's just a goal. It's a clearly defined goal. It's not that I tell you how. And I think that's the big important thing is Spider-Man, who actually did it in the movie, part of it, is going to do it differently than Black Panther. And when you create this character who's built around flight or super speed, how cool are you going to feel when you literally super speed it to the van? And you get this huge, like you do like 25 impact, because mixing universes now, you're Flash. And it's Darkseid, But you're like, you get to feel like the Flash. And that's okay. The Flash should feel like he can run to the van like that. And now it's the next part of the scene. Okay, what happens next? But if you don't have a Flash there, you got to run it across the battlefield. And then real quick, the markers that we talked about. So if it starts at 0, at the 10 of positive impact, that would be something I would write in my notes. Valkyrie swoops down and carries you a quarter of the way. That's a perfect thing of positive impact. A negative impact would be like, say, if it gets to negative 20, more of Thanos's foot soldiers come through, and all of these stat blocks become heroic challenges now. So like
Right,
now things can hurt you more.
If you think of like the whole bar of the main encounter as really just like a guide for sub encounters. So, right. So you start in the middle and your job is, let's stick with the gauntlet, get the gauntlet to the truck or whatever. Right. Then as you go to like -10, here's a complication. And you go to -20, here's another -30, you fail, for example. Right. But in the other direction too. So like there are points along those lines where, I mean, it's just for me really important nowadays. And I think I see this more in modern games, that like the GM is a person and they have stuff to do. And like the more you can make it easier for everyone to understand that, like this is a tangent, but last week I was running a game and I said, hey guys, what do you want to do this session? Are you going to go to the city? Because I'm not going to prep the city.
Right.
If you don't want to go there, you know, like if you're not going to go there this session, then I'm not going to put the work in to do that because I have a life. You know, like, so I think like something like this, where you have this like this bar that has preset things for the GM. The players don't have to know what those things are, but the GM does. Like when you get to this point, this is where the bad thing happens, or this point, this is where the bonus thing happens. It's like super useful, just on like a meta, like practical running the game level. Any game, yes,
any game. And that's what's important is my goals in making this game are making prep very easy and able to, somebody pointed this out in the chat earlier, but able to not use it poorly in a sense. Like you shouldn't be able to set up challenges that are wrong if you read the book. And then the other thing was, Tim, you said this, the way I like to put what you said was, I want to make a game where players can do anything, but they only do the things that they want to do. You know what I mean? Like, because when you can, like an open world game, you can go do anything, but an open world video game, you still have a quest sitting there of the next thing to progress that quest. There's no reason you shouldn't have that in a role-playing game. Because then if the player's like, oh, I don't know, let's look at our quests. Like that pattern has been around for so long that But that to me cracks the, I don't know what to prep, exactly what you described. And baking it into a game is just, I think, a really good thing.
Yeah.
Like one of those like tropes of like old school D&D where it's like, there's that comic where the player characters get to this fork in the road and it's like carefully curated city that I've spent 6 months planning and like random cave. And the players are like, great, random cave it is. Like that should never happen in your game. That should never happen. If you communicate with your players and you talk to them like, hey guys, I did a lot of work working on this city. You want to go there? And they go, yeah. Then they're going to the city, you know?
Exactly.
Like, we've agreed on it. And it's not, I don't think, it doesn't take away from the excitement of the game for you to have a conversation with your actual friends being like, hey, I put a lot of work into this. So can we go there? Or do you not want to go there? Because then I won't put the work into it.
Right. And I think agency, it can happen. It's about when it happens. It can still be there. I still have the right as a player to go, hey, you know, I would really like to explore that crazy place you named. Like, can we take an airship there? In my opinion, though, it's when that occurs. It's before you prep the city, as you say. You know, like...
Yes.
So, and again, this all comes down to play styles. If you love old school hex crawl, like, and you're a DM who is okay with that, like rock and roll, but like Lloyd said, I'm getting tighter and tighter on how much time I can devote to actually playing and running games. So a system like this excites me because what a module looks like is some cool scene ideas that you can piece together in whatever order you want, and then a final climax with the bar and like the stuff that happens and some ideas and some roll tables. I mean, I want to show up and run that. We make what we use here at Absolute Tabletop.
That's where another paradigm people have to shake is that concept that, okay, let's talk agency just real quick. You can go do this thing or you can go do this thing. You can pick a random third thing to do, but players are going to choose one of those two things because the random third thing isn't the artifact you need to complete the ritual or the thing to stop the bad guy. If the players are going, I want this other third thing, you've given them too many questions to ask. You should have made sure that you made them wonder about this thing or that thing. Like, it sounds funny, but you never see a part in a TV show where they go, okay, and they plan this whole big thing, and then it fails, and they go, all right, well, that was cool, but what do we do now? That should not exist in a role-playing game that I'm playing. Like you said, Tim, play style and all that, everything, but I'm not going to prep something the players aren't going to use. And I need to find a way to make a system that allows me to do that, or design a system, you know.
Like I've been harping on about this for a year now, which is just ask your players what they want to do before you run the game.
Yeah.
Like,
Exactly.
there's nothing wrong with you saying to your players, hey, my actual real life friends, like, it's not like you are friends. It's okay for you to be like, I don't have enough time to put in X amount of hours of prep. So what do you want to do? And I'm a player who like loves agency. It's really important to me in a game that I get to feel like my character has agency and I can make decisions that make the world feel immersive and free. But that doesn't mean that I have to get into the game. And if my GM has prepped this specific thing that they've asked me about, and I've said, yeah, I want to do that, then get in the game and go, actually, I'm going to do something else. That's just rude. It's not like, that's not agency. That's like not being a team player, I think, it's different.
Yeah, and Steve Fillmore mentioned some really good stuff in here. One of the things is that there's a difference between player agency, character agency, and the agency that exists in the social contract of the table, and that's 100%
Super
spot
good
on.
point. Yeah.
And so, actually, I want to jump in and mention some of the stuff that Steve Fillmore had mentioned, which is specifically asking, and this is a huge paradigm shift in comic books when it happened. There's a very famous story where the Green Goblin has, at the time, Spider-Man's girlfriend, Gwen Stacy, and she is hanging off a bridge and basically makes Spider-Man kind of choose what to do. Green Goblin drops Gwen Stacy, and he succeeds, but the sudden stop of the web catching her before she falls broke her back and kills her. Never before had we seen something this big and drastic in a hero comic where the hero did the thing, and then that repercussion happened. So Steve's question, I wanted to give a framework to what he was talking about. He said, the other thing I'm curious about with the idea of impact and superheroes and the way that the weight that they carry, the way they carry a legacy. When superheroes do mess up or kill or lose, is there a mechanic for that? And he says, how are you going to handle basically that unfortunate outcome, Spider-Man breaking Gwen's back, for example? It was meant to snag her and save her, but in the end, how do you decide that big of a negative impact? Because, Lloyd, I saw your response. But at what point in the play loop does something that bad happen? Is it once you reach a threshold for your character? Do you individually track it as well and add it to the pool? So that if you hit like some number, it's like, hey, the next bad thing that happens to you is collateral damage, someone gets hurt, your identity is revealed. Like, maybe that's how we could handle that, like individual impact. That also adds to the main track.
So my gut says that only happens in the epic heroic encounters.
Heroic encounters. Yep.
Right. So that can only like that level of intensity only happens in those encounters, first off, but also that there is a level when you get to like negative impact where, and I think it's fine to signpost it too. Like, hey, we're getting pretty close to the point where something bad is going to happen.
Yeah.
So you got to start working on the mission here, because if you don't, we're going to keep getting negative, and we're going to end up with, and maybe there's like a D4 table, which is like someone you love is hurt, major collateral damage or whatever, right? And then you see, but I'm thinking of like The Boys season 1, spoilers if anyone hasn't watched that, but like the plane and the decisions that are made there, like that is massive impact. And so the decisions that are made there are to hide the impact to the image of the superhero, right? And so maybe that's a decision you have to make too sometimes. But that's a tangent. But
that's perfect. But actually, let's focus on that, because what's interesting is another way you have to look at it. The impact is as a storyteller, not as a GM, not as a player, because what you described, and it's really good scene. But I'm going to try to think of one that's not spoilers so that I can explain it. Well, okay.
Say there's this boat, right? And this boat, no.
So I will say vaguely, because it's a very cool scene. But basically, you're superheroes. You show up to save a plane, but you realize that you're unable to. But you're on the plane, and the people are looking at you. You're superheroes. What do you do? Well, okay. Maybe some superheroes would decide, well, we need to hide the evidence. We're not going to save the people. What's important about that is you said, that would have great impact. The players would know that the GM is going to put that in their pocket. That's what's important, because it wouldn't necessarily be the end of that scene that the impact comes back, as you're saying. Later, it comes back up in the actual show. That's literally what happens. Somebody goes, hey, we found the evidence. The thing is, that's when the impact matters. Later, when it goes, okay, somebody knows something about you. Let's figure out what it is. You have all this list of stuff that happened in the last session, and you go, oh, it's the evidence. Boom. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So that is like, that can feel vague and stuff, but that is what we're going for, and I think that it can come out.
You say vague, I say abstracted.
Abstracted, but terms. Like that. Let me say this. When people hear that, they think of narrative games that exist and go, I won't like that. And so what I'm saying is this is going to be a mechanical way to get a narrative. And the thing I wanted to say about Gwen Stacy is I imagine the girlfriend dying would be a player decision. I don't think the GM decides Gwen Stacy dies in that situation. The game is not made, right? So that is a bold statement.
No, I like that. I like that idea.
That's the sort of thing that a player would go, oh, I bet she died. I saved her, but she dies. Like that is, you need to like, I just want to say as a game creator and talking to people that are playing, like sometimes we forget the players make the coolest decisions sometimes. And we are just giving them the ability to do so. The player might look at the negative impact and go, I don't think I get to save her also. I don't think I get to do both. And then you have that conversation Lloyd described of, okay, what happens, guys? So
that's great. No, and so something Jeremy Lilly said, and it is very much in line with what you're saying. He says sometimes things just need to be handled 100% narratively, like, and that is going to be a staple of this game because of how the powers are going to work. Where it's like it just tells you what you can do, and then it encourages you to come up with inventive ways to do beyond what it says written. But one of the things that I want to hit back on, because Steve actually also said, talking about the legacy that a hero has and all that stuff, the way that I imagine a campaign of this game going is that when you finish the mission, the scene, the epic climax, depending on how it turned out, I want to make a very rules-light, simple framework for what happens in between sessions so that you can manage your campaign without it being a bunch of bookkeepy kind of stuff, but something like a meta score of your reputation and public opinion and that kind of stuff, because that colors how you're treated into the next mission. There are times where the people love Spider-Man. There are times where they hate him. And when he shows up, they're like, get out of here, you creep, you know? So whatever that looks like, Steve, the way that I would want to handle that is depending on X, Y, and Z from session, you apply it to campaign frame simply and then decide what that looks like for the heroes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think like impact can, if you think of like X-Men and the way that people regard mutants in X-Men a lot, like when it goes well, people are fine with them. And when it doesn't go well, there's an uptick in like anti-mutant sentiment, right? Like that's like one like simplified way of showing like how a legacy works. If you're doing the job right all the time, then critics of you have very little to say.
Yeah.
It's harder to say, hey, maybe these mutants aren't so good for the world when they consistently are saving the world week to week and like are selfless and are doing good things. It takes one instance of like Wolverine cutting a normal guy in half for that to switch immediately, you know? Or like Spider-Man fails to save the people and then the woman gets hit with the car. Like it takes one instance for the opinion to switch. And that's a kind of impact that I think for me is really satisfying because it makes the world feel more real when people are reacting to super, because it's one of those things that comes up in the questionable Batman v Superman, where it's like, if there's a 1% chance that this god alien turns bad, that's too high a chance, right? Because he's god,
it's the one poison M&M in 100. You're like, I'm not eating M&Ms.
Right. Exactly. So I think like that's something to look towards too, is like the impact isn't necessarily personal, it's global. Like, how does the world feel about superheroes? And your decisions moment to moment have a huge impact on how people see superheroes in general, you know?
Yeah. And so much of this game and games I'd like to make and systems we're going to make this that we'll potentially use otherwise is what you're describing, which to me is just saving the state of the world. We don't do that enough in role-playing games in a way that has effects, right? We have our what is it called? Like recap docs, and that really helps and stuff. But the concept that what you're saying, you could look back at these sheets we're describing or this stuff and measure the general public opinion to then make a decision. again, that sounds like people are now have to spend time poring over and adding numbers, and it's no. You're just going, oh yeah, what was that stuff that happened? Oh, I'm going to latch onto this thing because it was a really high impact for them when the lady almost got hit. She's now on the news saying something and she wants unmasked heroes. That's what I'm like. Again, it's that paradigm thing where if I say that and people imagine that in D&D, they're like, what? But that's what it is you're going, what happened in the world? How can we make it seem like that's what mattered? That's what TV shows and movies are doing.
And
I think, so Jeremy just said, maybe their public stance is just the impact of any specific instance, mechanically speaking. And I think that's actually really clever. Like, because we talked before that in our example that I was Spider-Man and I went to the cop and I was like, hey, listen, man, I got this. Don't follow them. And he went, yep. But if superheroes are not popular at the moment and I go to the cop and I say, hey, man, he goes, get on the ground, right? Like, this
that's fantastic.
Like, so that's one sort of mechanical way, which is still narrative of showing like public opinion actually matters a huge amount to how superheroes work often, particularly a superhero who's like local, like Spider-Man, who relies on other people who are not super, and
that exact concept can be improvised. But what I want to do is build a system where those details are easier to improvise. You write down the things that are difficult to improvise, and then you go, oh, you want to talk to the police officer? Right, you made that up. Tim did not put a police officer in the thing. I said, are the police there yet? And we just assumed they would be. That's how the game would work. But if you said you wanted to talk to him, I'd go, okay, well, how are things with the police? I don't have to remember it as the GM. I can just go, oh, let me just see real quick.
You guys literally already have like an infamy tracker.
From
Dragon Grid. Already have one. So it's
same exact concept. Yes,
it's the same concept.
Yeah.
Yes.
What
that's
great.
What
they have to do is then they have to list all the people it could affect and stuff. And I'm like, no, that's the part we're doing away with. We're taking the narrative things that people do like from some narrative games that are a little too broad and going, no, we're corralling them so that you get to make up you get to mechanically decide what is happening and then make up what that thing is, and that's what makes it interesting.
Hey, welcome, Keel.
Hey.
What's going on, man? Keel Adam from Run Right Play is here with us.
Hey, what's up?
We are
6 a.m. everybody.
I know. I was like, man, this guy is a champion. So we're talking about a game called Superheroic, as you saw, and we're just talking about a play loop and sort of talking about how to make mechanics for a game so that it feels like comics. Because I haven't hit one yet that feels like comics. It feels like a superhero RPG, which is very different to me. The thing I wanted to hit on next was, something that could work. We have these climax scenes that have an outcome bar, and they, either hit them positive 30 or negative 30 is a win-loss state. If it hits negative 30, maybe that is in the campaign management portion. There's a meta impact. So there's actually a worldwide impact bar for the group of heroes, like that it has things like public opinion is bad, things like that. So it has this like sliding bar of like, hey, you're well loved. You can kind of, and it just gives some ideas, like you said, general. You're well loved. People will try to help you and assist you, and whatever. Something like that could be fun, because then what you do in the campaign, that failure affects what happens next. Like, we can't ask the mayor for that thing. We're gonna have to sneak in because everyone hates us,
Yeah, and like, how is the paper gonna react to this thing that I do? Because it matters a lot, actually. And like, newspaper is kind of, I guess at this stage, maybe not so important, but how is social media gonna react to the thing that I do?
Sure.
Like, if I've consistently been helping people and have done the good thing, then maybe people are like, oh, he's just made one mistake. Like, but he means well.
Yeah.
But if you're consistently causing collateral damage, then people are like, this guy's a menace, unmask him, and that's going to have big gameplay impact, I think, because you can't rely on people to help you or to hide you or a bunch of other stuff,
Yeah. And that will matter so much to me as a GM in what I prep. It's so much easier when I'm like, oh, you know what? Let's pull this in. So Jeremy mentioned something. He goes, comics is similar to pulp. It's usually a question of whether it isn't a question of whether or not the heroes will succeed. It's merely a matter of how far they have to be pushed before they do so. And that actually is a mechanic in the game. So Jeremy, in the play mechanic, if you quote unquote fail a roll, you actually succeed at the task, but there is negative impact. So that's exactly how we're going to handle it. So, because Lloyd used the perfect example. If you have a jousting super knight, the whole game shouldn't crumble when they fall off their horse trying to get on top of it for the joust, you know? They should do really well in the joust, but then maybe the lance splinters and hits someone in the neck in the crowd. That's way worse. But they're not bad at jousting. They had a negative impact.
Circumstances happen to them.
Yes.
Yes.
That's the big thing. That's the difference usually, is the circumstances happen to them. And that again, just ape in movies and TV. Like they get to the next place and, oh, we did it. And then something happens to them.
Exactly. So a couple more comments in the chat, but I was going to say, Keel, to a little bit put you on the spot, was there anything we've talked about that you have questions about? Sometimes we've been talking about it for an hour, so maybe we're missing things that are unclear, or is there anything you want us to go over again?
Yeah, I was just wondering then, with the example of the joust there, I love that circumstances happen to them. So to me, that could be circumstantial stuff, or it could be someone actively working against them, like a villain. That's a place to put that in there, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's what I was going to ask. Would that be up to the player or the GM or the group as to what bad impact happens there? I missed the start of the stream. I was sleeping.
No. You're great. I think we're still trying to decide how that works. But the way...
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
For me, when I run a narrative game, I require the players to help me with that stuff because I'm bad at the circumstances of like what goes wrong here. So I always just demand it from players, even whether it's part of the game or not. I just think it's smarter to like open those things up to the table in general, you know? So something happens here. There's a complication. What is it? Let's talk about it real quick. And then we decide. I think usually works better because putting that just on the GM is difficult for the GM, firstly, because they don't want to be too harsh, but also they don't want to be not harsh enough. So there's a middle ground, and the players will tell you by their discussion what they think is a fair amount of thing, you know?
And what's interesting to them. They might want to explore a certain side of their character. So I think the middle ground, Keel, and then James, I'll let you hop in, is that as of now, the way that it's going to happen, and I'll explain the play loop in a moment, but the way that it's going to happen is you have a positive or a negative impact. And I think that when it hits a certain threshold for you personally, there's a table of different general things like collateral damage, your secret identity is revealed, someone you love is hurt, and it's not going to be random. When you hit a certain threshold, let's say it's a 20 entry table, you choose, if you're at 10, you have to choose something 10 or lower of things that happen. So it's like a guide more than it is like, oh, and then randomly your aunt dies. Or something. I don't know. We're still trying to figure that out, but in general...
Uncle Ben!
It will be a both and where it's like, there'll be a lot of tools for the player to decide, the GM to decide, or both, I think.
Yeah, and I think...
I've been swimming in this design space for the last year or two, so I'm so excited for this.
Oh, well, I'm excited for this too, because I have not been, and I'm like, wow, this is really cold. Are you all the way in up to your neck?
That's what's funny is I do get the chance where sometimes when we're brainstorming, Tim or Jeff, they'll be like, oh, I had an idea for this, and I'm like, well, the thing I've been working on obviously will fit this. I'm not going to come up with a new thing, right, for what I was thinking. I'm so in that space. But Keel, what I wanted to say is, because I heard a very specific question from you, and so I wanted to make sure that I felt like it got answered. We don't know if the players or the GM in the moment would decide. We also haven't decided necessarily. The joust example is a bad one to start with, because more what we want is circumstances that affect an overarching thing. So in a sense, in the jousting example, maybe winning the tournament is your end goal, or rather, impressing the princess. Winning the tournament would impress the princess, but winning the tournament and somebody getting killed in the neck would bring a dour mood and wouldn't, you know what I mean? So it's it's weird, and we're going to codify it, but the plan would make it so that it's just that level of broad enough so that the players and the GM will likely end up finding the perfect thing that fits, because they'll all know that it fits there. It won't be scrounging around to go, oh, well, my aunt was here, so maybe she'll die. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Hopefully that gives a little more context to what you were asking.
Yeah, it does. And so, Keel, the way that it works is it's a roll under mechanic. So you have stats, and it's a roll under. But instead of a damage die, your stat, depending on how high it is or low it is, has a damage die that it does, but it's impact. So if you are not that smart, your impact die would be like a D4. If you're very, very strong, it could be as high as a D20 for like cosmic level heroes and stuff. The way that this works is there are challenges that are non-heroic and heroic. So a non-heroic challenge, you can succeed. So Spider-Man stopping a mugger. Spider-Man's not going to fail if it's just a non-heroic challenge. But what will happen is if you roll under and you make the roll, you get to roll positive impact. If you roll under and you fail the roll, you still stop the muggers, but now you roll, and that goes on a negative impact track. The positive impact and the negative impact we're playing with all builds toward a climax scene where it's like a budget that the players and the GM get to spend on things that go their way or don't go their way based on their choices in the session building up to it. Is kind of the rough idea, if that makes sense.
I love it. Yeah. It seems like it'll naturally sort of snowball, but it can sort of roll up or down the hill. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm excited.
Killer.
Yeah, I think
That's
making
awesome.
sure, making sure you can tell a story with the snowball, right, is the fun thing. I think it looks a little different than some games because I meant something I mentioned before is specifically because if you do the things you're used to doing in a game, it will not feel great. And I think that will be one of our biggest hurdles is making sure people play the game right. And I know that sounds so ridiculous to say, right? But like, we are just looking down the barrel of very popular role-playing games that are all very similar. But that little concept there of like, no, it's telling how the story happened, not if the story happened.
Exactly.
There's a weird thing that's happening specifically in the small group of designers that we are friends with, where we're like pushing towards more narrative games, but not so narrative that they don't feel like games. That's what I have been struggling with. Like,
Yes. There's a way
making
to
Blood
do
and
it.
Ink is like, there's a level of narrative game that to me is so narrative that there's no game. It's
Correct.
just collaborative storytelling,
Agreed.
which is fine as an exercise for sure. And I enjoy it too. But if I want to play a game, then I want there to be rules and mechanics and sort of a bounded level of thing that can happen for, like, firstly to help me narrate better, but also just like, I think it's more fun as an experience. And it's funny that you are sort of leaning towards that thing as well at the moment. And I think several other designers in our little community are doing the same thing, where it's like, we want it more narrative than D&D, but we don't want it so narrative that doesn't feel like a game, you know?
Agreed. And that was a
Can I-
conversation that we had.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. Because I want to be so bold right now as to say that that is the way games are going and will go, because we have games like that and they're very popular and they're called video games. You know what I mean? Like, we have that same concept where I just want to point out that I don't think that it is just us. I think that it is a general progression will move toward the systems that people paid millions of dollars to make, for better or for worse, you know? But yes.
Sure. And Keel, so to just kind of talk you through then what matters and how does this work, you can accrue enough negative impact to have something happen to you directly. So your negative impact goes toward everybody because it goes towards the GM's bank. But also if you hit, set bracket number, whatever that number is, and Lloyd kind of mentioned, it would be, a lantern would be hung on it, which is, hey, things are not going well for you this week. Something bad's about to happen. And then if you hit, say, 20 or whatever it is, personally, maybe your identity's revealed to some people, or someone that you love is hurt, or those things that happen to you personally. But then the GM gets to tag you with it again in the final scene because they get to spend it so that Magneto also has the assistance of, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, that kind of thing. And I think the way... Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I love the way that it will. Sorry. I love the way that it feels like it will naturally create and encourage the overarching sort of storyline, as well as individual character arcs, which is, again, the sort of design space I've been playing in. I love the way the approach you're taking here. It's going to be really cool.
Killer. And something real quick, and I appreciate that very much, because that's the vibe I'm going for, is that you have impact either way, and taking failure out of the equation was something that James and I were really like talking about. Like in comics, heroes don't fail. They just mess up. So real quick, Shock 1999 asked a question a while back, and I just want to mention it, which was, who will players or DM be the main villains? The DM will be the villains. This rule set is going to have language that leans more about superheroes, but there will be nothing that will stop you from using it to make supervillains either. Because those powers and those kinds of things, it really comes down to an ideology, So the DM will handle that stuff. The way that I think that I'm going to start to design the game in terms of the scenes is that you create the climax scene first, and then you work backward to what scenes would lead up to that. And I think it can make a bigger difference. So if Magneto's trying to rip the bridge from, San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge, but the point was because on it is this, very gifted mutant gene scientist or whatever. What you do is you then reverse engineer the scenes that lead up to the gene scientist. So it's like, I guess and I'm using examples that aren't really getting my point across, but main scene, you then seed clues and related incidents so that it feels like it matters. Meaning, Spider-Man would not be stopping bank robbers. He would be stopping this B squad of villains who are robbing a gene bank. Because it's related, it deals with, so it's like, wait, what? Which then leads you to those questions that gets you to the next scene, which is, a mutant that's been cured, who is now like on, propaganda wagon or whatever. This all leads to the final scene. So if you fail and if those challenges fail, it will inform that scene. I think that's how I want to do it.
Yeah, and I think, in all honesty, and this is gonna be another one of those mantras that people are probably gonna get sick of me saying, but if you look at a TV show or movie, you can do that. Whether or not the writers did that, you can do that. Because, and this is an example that we used earlier, Thanos can't steal the Infinity Gauntlet if you don't know who Thanos is and there's not an Infinity Gauntlet. So if you go, at the end, I want this thing to happen, you go, okay, well, if that thing's gonna happen, I need the place that thing happens, what it happens to, who it happens to. Suddenly you can't stop prepping. Because you know the gene bank, the other thing is when you know secrets like that it's all about this gene bank, this gene splicer guy, mutant, whatever, maybe the cured mutant, and the players don't yet, which is in my opinion, when I play video games, role-playing games, a rare instance. Usually like when the GM knows something, we kind of know it in that vein. The idea is if you can create a situation like that where because you've worked backwards, stuff the players haven't discovered yet, but will, you can foreshadow. Part of the reason you can't foreshadow in D&D is because you don't know what's going to happen later. And I understand that that's kind of part of the system we built, but that's why ours looks so different. Because you do have to know what the end thing is, because you can't foreshadow something you don't know. Or at least not well,
Yeah.
And I want to.
I think that's like starting from the end and working backwards is also an easier way to prep in general, I think. Particularly for like if the sessions are contained, like I think they will be in this because they're sort of episodic.
Correct.
It's way easier then to be like, okay, we end with this cool thing. How do we get there so that everything is clear? And I think that's the perfect way to do it. There's a question about personal challenges, ones that have impact but are almost entirely narrative. Tony deciding to solve the time travel question or go back to being a hero, or Division in Civil War. I actually think there's no reason why you can't use the smaller encounters and just have narrative discussions or like personal scenes in the same way. You can use the same mechanics and just sort of extrapolate them out, abstract them out a little bit enough to have it be, okay, it's people arguing about the right way to do the mission. Yeah. And maybe the Punisher is like, well, we could just kill everybody. And Spider-Man's like, no, we can't kill anybody. Like,
yeah.
And you can have that be what are they called? Like not heroic, the other ones.
I'm trying to figure out what to call them so they don't sound like they're not important. So right now I'm just calling them
whatever word,
heroic and non-heroic because typical or standard all sound like too meh. So I haven't decided,
and
Yeah.
my preference for something like this is to call it a challenge, and some challenges are heroic. The reason,
I think that, yeah.
because then if you decide to have a different type of challenge, it fits within the general intuitiveness of the rest of the things. There's a heroic challenge.
like
now
it.
there's a super heroic
challenge and heroic challenge, yeah.
There doesn't have to be, but that idea where if you say challenge, it's implied that you mean challenge. If you say heroic, you get it.
It also works
And then at the
because
table, if the
challenge
players,
is... So you go.
sorry, and then at the table, if the players are unsure, they're like, "Is this a heroic challenge?" No, is the answer, and that is
Exactly.
fine.
That's great. No, that's
You don't
great.
have to
Know all
say
the
it's
things that
no,
mean.
it's a mundane one. It's just no, it's not heroic.
Challenge also doesn't mean that it has to be a fight. It also it's a challenge to talk down Thor
100%.
or or to discuss the way we're going to do the mission or have a moral quandary about personal challenges are also challenges, right? So challenge
Absolutely.
sort of covers all of that.
And this is abstracted out to absolutely account for that. So you would have, you have an influence score. The stats right now are might, agility, intellect, influence, and willpower. Those felt very superhero-y. And so in that, you might say, if you're Tony Stark, you might say, well, no, I'm not going to use my influence. I'm actually going to use my intellect. I'm going to get serious and I'm going to get brainy on you. Well, Tony Stark's rocking like a D12 because his intellect's an 18. Whereas Captain America versus his intellect would be using influence. That moral stick-to-itiveness of no. And so now they're rolling against each other. And like you say, it's not necessarily that they win or lose. Their point gets across, but one of them is going to negative impact and positive impact. It's like this kind of thing for the scene. And that kind of feels neat where, maybe the outcome bar in that scene is, yeah, we all sign the accord and we're all going to be under government control. That's the outcome. And the opposite outcome is, well, no, we disband and I'm going to continue to go negative with my Captain America. It's no, we're going to disband. I would disband before I am a puppet of the government,
It's also, you can have a situation where the mission is successful, but there's impact to the feelings of the group, So we did it, but I'm so angry at Captain America, right? Or we did it, but I can never trust Iron Man again, right? That's also a kind of impact that you can have. So whether it doesn't have to be collateral damage, it can be we did the mission, but our bond is broken, maybe irreparably, That's definitely a kind of impact too.
So in that regard there, because this would apply for into character stuff as well as stuff against villains or, reputation in society, everything else. Is there a way currently that you have in mind for keeping track of those sort of threads or those threats or anything like that? Stuff that is going to or has a risk of them coming due? Or making it basically, it just forms a pick list for, all right, there's a negative impact. Let's have a look at what might make sense here.
That's kind of what I'm trying to suss out the specifics of, the details, because I don't know exactly how to handle that. But yeah, I want that, what you're describing. I don't know exactly where and how. I've got so far down the concept, but now it's getting rubber meets the road of pick a thing. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, so much of what we've, some of what we talked about, Keel, is the idea that really what we're doing is we're saving the state of the game more explicitly and in more explicit chunks so that we have what you call the pick list. I think if I'm understanding that phrase correctly, I like that. But the idea that there are positive and negative impacts and that there would be holes sometimes in the narrative that you would then look back at these things that you've deliberately written down, versus in some cases where a GM has to have the consideration to write something down and then write it down and then use it. By making a light framework of where things can go, the goal is to make it super easy to be able to look at the positive and negative impacts and, again, improvise how something happened to tie into the story rather than feeling like you have to come up with something cool from the jump.
Yeah, and I also think that one of the things that I want to do is for session-wide, also welcome Jordan is hanging out in the chat with us. Super cool, awesome YouTube channel. Go check that out. The PH is silent. the way that I think could be cool is if you have challenges that have an outcome that you just write on a sheet, a master sheet for the session, kind of like what you guys are talking about, but I can now go through the outcome and it's like, stopped the crooks, but hurt some people. And so that's a cool way, if I do roll on a table or pick from there is some risk of your identity, being uncovered, you can link those things together. So they're not necessarily, it's more to have more ingredients in the pot to be like, oh, maybe that person that you hurt actually saw your mask slip off, whatever, just to have narrative influence on the general things like collateral damage, blah, blah, blah. So maybe you write down the outcome. Maybe every challenge that is not heroic, you just write a quick note about the outcome on a sheet so that you can then kind of look down the list of like, okay, here's the shopping list of things to pull back now to hurt you. Like you could have someone who comes up and is like, hi, how's it going? It's like, I'm good. Who are you? Here you go. Just take that piece of paper. What's this? That's a subpoena. We'll see you in court, masked hero, because you hurt 2 of my clients and everyone's going to know about it. And it's like, what? Yep. Like that is a really interesting way to have your identity at risk because you're going to have to show up in a court of law. And then do you show up or not? And do they have any way of knowing if it is you or not? So yeah, I think having that grocery list of bad or good things that happen so that when it is time for the impact to come due, you have a cool, situation.
Yeah, I love it. There's a question in the chat. How do you plan to reconcile supers of vastly different scale in the same game since attributes are objective?
That is a really good question. I'm going to tie it into a question that Midarn also asked up above because they link, which is, what about like the playbooks or classes in this game or archetypes? One of the things that is very, very common in comic books is to have Green Arrow running around next to Superman. Green Arrow is just a human man who can shoot arrows with incredible accuracy. Superman is an alien god. And if you want to play a game like that, you can actually choose to play a game like that. The difference is that Green Arrow can do things that Superman isn't probably even going to focus on. So there are archetypes that dictate your power levels in general. And then there's a basic leveling system that allows you to raise some of your dice. So like a veteran Batman is going to be neck and neck with a like novice or middle Superman in general in terms of what they're rolling and how, but just Batman is going to be expressed differently through the mechanics and the powers where it's like Batman outwits Superman and has a kryptonite arrow, that Green Arrow shoots into Superman. And Superman can still squash Batman like a bug. So
right. It's a question of scale, right? So
correct.
The things that Dr. Manhattan deals with or Superman deals with are not the same things that Daredevil deals with. Daredevil,
correct.
Who can punch pretty good, like
yeah, and take a whooping.
Right, it's totally different, but they can still work together in the same mission, and I don't think it would necessarily feel weird because it's a question of what they're doing in the mission. So Superman is not on the ground beating up mugs, like that would be ridiculous. Like it would just be comical, and I think of like Homelander who like slices people in half with laser eyes. Like that's not a person who's on the street fighting thugs to get the information about some shady gang dealing. Superman is out there fighting other gods and like fighting himself, like fighting his own morality and what he's allowed to do based on his unlimited power, So it's a different of scale, I guess, what you're doing based on, and I think you can have those people in the same mission without any issue as long as the players understand that like when you choose to play the Superman archetype, you're playing a different kind of game because part of the question of that is, am I allowed to use my incredible powers in this way? You know what I mean? Like Superman fights himself more than anything, right?
And then to kind of give you an example of how we would give game masters the tools to do that is the archetypes, and I'll run through them very quickly. And these are, I got to figure out what side of the fence. Oh, go ahead.
Answer this question real quick before you go into more archetypes. I just wanted to hit on real quick a little bit of a different answer to that same question.
Okay.
Because it says, do you plan to reconcile supers of vastly different scale? Like most RPGs, most players in the game would be the same scale as each other. Again, that means something different because it's superpowers, right? But you wouldn't have a level 1 character and a level 10 character. That wouldn't be a part of the game. What levels mean is a separate conversation. And then does Superman or the Hulk just win all the time compared to Batman or Hawkeye? No, everyone in the superheroic game wins all the time, whether they're Batman or Hawkeye, because the game is not about because winning means something different in every situation, and getting the bad guy isn't always winning. So that's why it's more, everything you guys said was true and correct, but to bring it back just that one step further back, it's very much like role-playing games in that it'll be balanced among players. So you're not going to have one Superman flying around solving all the problems while this players just, hang out.
Sure.
And you will have no, that's the point, is it's harder to fail. You'll get to use your powers all the time, but you won't really, it doesn't matter. Like you said, Lloyd, you're playing a different character if you're Superman.
And something that is, we still have to dial it in, but that's the reason why you have impact and not deal damage. Because if you have a very, very hyper intelligent supercomputer that's a villain, you can play it so that the only thing it's susceptible to is intellect. So Superman is trying choo 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 choo, and it's it's just got these shields. This is not a might challenge. This is an outsmart the supercomputer challenge. And you can rip parts off of it. Oh, look, it grows back. There are ways to have certain challenges that aren't just deal damage, and Superman is really good at dealing damage. But Batman is really good at solving crimes and being a detective. So if there was an actual crime scene and the challenge was a crime scene, Superman might be kind of helpless and just go, all right, what are we doing, Batman? Because the challenge is a willpower / intellect challenge. And you can punch it all you want, but it's not going to help. You can't go punch in the crime scene. So that's also how you make Batman feel awesome, is he tells Superman where they need to find Darkseid, because Superman wouldn't know otherwise until Darkseid had already killed a bunch of people and hear their screams from across the planet. Anything else you guys want to throw in about that particularly? Because I was going to mention the archetypes, but I don't want to steamroll.
Just like a similar example is that in The Dark Knight, the Joker does a lot to provides a lot of weird and difficult moral situations for Batman to deal with. And he's good at that. Batman's good at that specific thing. Superman would go and find the Joker and turn him into goo. It's not really the same story. It's a question of scale and the story you're trying to tell. The villain is good at certain things, but the Joker's just a guy, right? He can't fight Superman even for a second. So you got to think about the story you're trying to tell, and see in what ways those different hero archetypes work in that story. And if your intent as the group is, okay, I want to tell a gritty street level, Daredevil style game, then probably you shouldn't play Superman. You should play somebody who's more fitted to that
precisely
kind of story.
Yep. And also big shout out to Big Bearded Nerd. I didn't see your comments, but if you're still here, thanks for hanging out. He was just mentioning about race the bad guys to the thing, a la G.I. Joe and the mass device. In that situation, if you're a speedster, if you're the Flash, being really fast and helping to get people out of the city because a meteor is coming is really cool. Batman's trying to figure out how to stop the meteor. Superman's trying to stop the meteor himself, but the Flash is running people out of the city in case both of them fail. And so it's just making them feel heroic for different reasons. A way to handle that also, Lloyd, in terms of what you just said, is, as of now, we'll see what happens. As of now, the archetype gives you a power die. And if you are using your powers in a scene where you have to go, okay, how laser eyes are your laser eyes? In many cases, you succeed, but in some cases, if I'm saying, well, actively there is a powerful being that's doing repulsor blasts against your laser eyes, they roll their power die versus yours to see which one wins, basically. So you have a power die associated with your archetype. Right now, it's Powerhouse, which is like Superman, Sentry, Hyperion. Scrapper, which is like your Wolverine, Punisher. Prowler, Acrobat, Spider-Man, Heavyweight, which is to me a different class than a powerhouse. Heavyweight is Hulk, Juggernaut. Yeah, like I have Paragon, which is like Cyclops, Captain America, Green Arrow. Even Batman could be a Paragon if you wanted to play it that way. Mythic, which is like Wonder Woman, Thor, Hercules. I have Genius, so Tony Stark, Reed Richards. Supernatural, so someone like Spawn, Ghost Rider, Constantine. Elemental, so that could be Storm or Swamp Thing. A Mystic, Doctor Strange, Zatanna, Dr. Fate, and then Cosmic. Silver Surfer, Beyonder, that kind of stuff. Now, maybe we'll chop those down, pare them down, maybe we'll slide them around, I don't know. But for now, the power die that is associated with those is specific, and I want the abilities that each of them get to make them feel good at the thing. So if you wanted to gate your play, you could say, oh, and you have to choose an archetype with a power die of a D8 or lower. That would immediately wipe some of them off the map. So you have to choose a Prowler or a Scrapper or a Paragon because you're street level. You're making the Defenders, you're not making the Avengers. And then real quick, and then I'll throw it to you all. As of now, for example, you could make your heroes by choosing whichever one you were feeling like at the moment. So you could make Captain America as a Scrapper if you wanted to, or a Paragon. There's really no... I'm not going to make the ability so specific, but what I do want is that the Scrapper is really fighty. So if you made the Punisher, they would feel like if the fight gets thick, they get better than, say, someone who is a Genius. Whatever those abilities look like. That's where abilities will come into play with your archetype. Then you layer on top of that powers, if that makes sense. So that's pretty much what the archetypes are as of now.
That's rad. That's a really cool. Those 12, is it?
It's 12.
That's an awesome base. I think that pretty much covers all bases. Like, you had some really good examples for each one, right? And I like the power die thing. So, for a Scrapper or your Prowler, they obviously have a lower power die. So what do they have that's higher instead, or that balances that? Or is it not so much about balance in that way?
So that's kind of what I have to figure out, and I'm open to suggestions. But right now, what they would have is their power die would only be a D6, but the idea would be something, and I have some just rough bracketed stuff. If you lose 1 resilience, which is health, you immediately deal 1 point of resilience in return. So if you get hurt, you hurt back. That's part of what makes you... No one else would do that. Just the Scrapper gets to hurt right back. If you roll a 1 or a 2 on any impact die where you're in a fight or would intend to wound or damage, you deal 3 impact instead. So instead of, I rolled a 1, no, I immediately do a 3 because I'm a Scrapper, and even if I roll a 1, I get to do that.
I would encourage, if I can interrupt for a second,
please.
to also, for these things, have a thing that just says you do a thing. So
I love it.
If you're the Batman, the detective archetype, when you have to find a clue, you find it. Full stop.
Oh, I love that.
No conditional, no nothing. And to make up for your lack of power, you have more utility, right? So a Scrapper like Wolverine, the first time that you take resilience, you don't.
Yep.
Or you whatever, something like that. So it's just like a flat. You get to do a thing.
I love it.
Full stop. No conditional thing. I think those are a nice way to show that the lower power level people are actually really useful at the thing they're good at.
Yep, that's brilliant.
Because they're not going to be as good at fighting, but it's not just about fighting. You have to also investigate. You have to also do PR. So if you're the Paragon, then when you suffer a bunch of negative impact to your, what are we calling it, collateral damage, you get to re-roll it or something, right?
Right. Yeah, you get to roll twice, or you get to choose one or the other because you spin it in the press, or
Yes. Yep. So like for the lower power ones, I would include I mean, they can all have one, I guess, but particularly for the lower power ones, you just do a thing. You're good at a thing and you just do it.
That's fantastic. I think it's great.
An interesting thing with that, in the way I understand this system so far, is, as you've already described it, like you pretty much already do a thing when you set out to do it, except it's a matter of what's the consequence. So just pointing out, like, I love that approach. I love Spire and Heart for that reason, where you just do things. Like you can declare, for example, that this NPC is sympathetic to the rebellion, and that's a fact now because that's one of the character abilities. So, but so I suppose that will be the difference between just doing something with these types of abilities versus the fact that you can always just do something, and it's just a matter of, is there a consequence? So I don't know if that would be the direction, having it as more like declare narrative stuff just happens rather than related to a goal necessarily.
Yeah, that's fantastic. James, that's the first time you've heard the archetypes. What do you think?
We haven't talked enough about it for me to tell you.
That's fair.
Because I have a very clear idea of how a character creation would happen and how we would use those archetypes. And because that differs so greatly potentially from what you have, I think it's great. And I think that having it be so broad is important. And Jeremy actually had a good question that I answered here, but
I was going to say, yeah, you're talking about, go ahead.
But basically for powers, he says, you know, it's similar to trappings in Savage Worlds. He says there's the basic mechanical effect and you have to reskin it to fit your character. The goal would be that you could make any power you wanted, right? And similar to most other role-playing games, you would talk about it and make sure that the power isn't to kill any human being within a 10-mile radius. Like, you know what I mean? Like power, like super speed, whatever. But it wouldn't, I don't imagine splat books of powers and powers and powers and powers. But instead, like, hey, I played a game where I was a guy with super speed and claws. Because the super speed and claws aren't what matters, they just colored your descriptions. The claws may have been the thing that cut the guy in half that got you the bad PR, but it could have been a sword and it could have been a blast and it could have... The goal is to just continue, like, every time you add something to the game, to keep that high level view to go, okay, our power is still safe. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
a lot of it will just... So I think character creation will be like, you could have like this template with no narrative on it. That's like, hey, this is an allowable character. Now fill in what powers they have. You know what I mean? Like, again, we haven't talked about it and there's a lot of details there and stuff, but I really like them. And I like that I think that they'll act more as categories, because if I make my super crazy, interesting, snowflakey, potentially character that's like Thor, if I tell you that I have I forgot what it was, but maybe it wasn't cosmic, mythical. If I tell you I'm playing a mythical person, you have a general concept of who other ones like that are, and you know immediately who I am, without me giving you a drawing on my character and explaining my character. It helps, categories like that help bridge the gap between I made whatever I wanted and don't have a drawing or picture or good description of it. This is what it is. So I really like them for that reason. That
I would shrink it down. Maybe that's an unpopular choice. But
no. I need to figure out which ones are like, some of them should be. Yeah, I just didn't. I think
you're in the space anyway where it's just like, here are all the things that exist, you know? So totally. But I would crunch it down. And I also think it just occurred to me that every archetype should have like a dependent or like a person that's mortal, so to speak, that they care about, right? That's actually part of your character creation. Like, what's the thing that keeps you grounded?
Sure.
Particularly if you're Superman or if you're the Silver Surfer, what ties you into the world so that you don't become Dr. Manhattan and live on Mars?
Yeah.
Like,
and so what I've done is I've actually decoupled that from the archetype. But you're saying, just so that there's actually the final part of character creation is character details, which would be, are you a student? Are you Peter Parker?
Totally.
You know what I mean? Or are you a scientist? Do you have a day job? Are you the Punisher, where you just like live in a warehouse, you know, shining guns, or absolutely all that? And then it's like, it's a very narrative thing. So you could absolutely skip that if you're just like, hey, you want to play a quick game of whatever. It's like, great, I'm the waffler, you know. You could just, or you take that hot moment to say, yeah, let's build character links. So 100% smart. And yeah, I'm going to make it so that is a final stage of character creation. It's also where you decide what your name is. Real quick geek out thing. I'm going to create
go ahead.
naming tables from different eras of comics. So you know what I mean?
Yep.
So you can roll and have like a gritty 90s, so it's like, like Dark Rider, or it could be like, the Golden Lasso,
Yeah.
depending on what era. And then I want to answer Jeremy's question. He said, are you making this to create existing supers? You should be able to create any super you can imagine, but we're not going to put that in the game.
Yeah, and what I wanted to say about the archetypes, because Lloyd, I agree with you, there should be fewer archetypes. What Tim read off to me is something else. It's a good list, but I'm going to use it for something else.
Yeah, because I think arguably you can take the mythic and the cosmic and the Superman and make them one.
Sure, and I'm super down with
Archetype.
that. Absolutely.
But
Archetype?
I need to know if you are a god, a alien,
Yes.
or a
Yeah.
cosmic being. You know what I mean? And I'm like, that's where I'm like, that list is good, but yeah, the archetypes I could see. Yeah,
Right. So
that's
you
why
have
there's
top level
there's a
heading,
ton
which
of
is
detail
like
there.
the super, which is Superman, but also Silver Surfer, but also anyone who's like that level of power. And then underneath that you see the examples or whatever, right?
Yeah, and that's I think it is a little too long because it's that when you're trying to make a character, you're like, wait, hold on, how many are there and all that. Yeah, I do want to do that. If I could get it down to like 6, I think probably cut it in half, and then just create options for breakout boxes that say, hey, do you want to create a mythical this or that, or do you a lot of narrative inspiration, but fewer mechanical choices.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I don't know how everybody is on time. I'm good for a little while longer. I don't know if everybody else is or.
I'm good.
I do
too.
have to go. We usually end at 6. As much as I do love this, I had plans after this and didn't realize exactly what.
No, you're good because I was going to say I'm good to keep going for another 10 or 15 minutes. James, if you want to bounce, you can. I was going to just kind of go over character creation real quick. Is there anything you want to say before you leave, or?
No, that's fine. If we're going to do 10 or 15 more minutes, I can hang out. I just wanted to make sure because I'm like, I could see this going for a while.
It could, yeah. No, we've already. Thanks for everybody hanging out. We're almost at the 2-hour mark, but basically, I was going to say probably another 10 minutes was where I was at. So I just wanted to roughly explain what character creation would look like, so you can kind of see the way that it's built. The first thing you choose is it is a stat array, so you don't roll for your stats. That just makes designing it way easier. It makes people feel like it's fair. They can put their stuff wherever they want. There's a variant where you can roll. You have a stat array and you put it wherever you want. As I mentioned, the characteristics are might, agility, intellect, influence, and power, or willpower. Once you choose that, you choose what's called your distinction. And that's basically just where do you get your pluses. They're named after the characteristics. So you're mighty, you add +2 to might, +1 to anything else. You're agile, you add +2 to agility, +1 to anything else. Down the line. So you just choose like, where do you have your +2, and then you can put the +1 anywhere else. After that, you choose the archetype, which we kind of talked about. So let's say I choose a prowler. In this instance, I would get prowly things. I can do the automatic detection of a crime scene, or a good one for a prowler is like, you can automatically hide. You're hidden. That's just a good kind of thing. That would tell you your starting resilience, which is kind of our overall hit points. It would tell you your power die. And then Keel, I don't know if you were here for this, but I might have re-explained it. Those characteristics where you end up, so if your might is a certain number, it gives you an impact die to roll. So an 18 is just always a D12. Like the higher the ability, the higher your die is that you get to roll to cause more impact. It's basically like a damage die that's linked to the characteristic, so that you don't have to have weapons and equipment or any other separate floating thing. So then after you do those things, you would know the power level of the game that you're playing. So if we're playing a power level 3, that's level 3. And there are some simple guidelines of like, hey, at a power level 3, heroes will have probably 3 to 4 powers. And that's very milky, but basically you would choose your powers then. And that's kind of character creation. So you would choose whatever, because I'm going to have the same problem with powers. And I need to do what Jeremy suggested and what you guys both, all suggested, where it has to be general enough so that it's a decent short list that you can extrapolate, but not so general that it feels cheesy, like you have to do a bunch of work to make your character. So you could make Wolverine, and that would be abstracted to, you get this like toughness points. So on top of your resilience, you get a pool of 5 points. And then I was going to maybe even make some powers that you can spend 2 powers on to dip like 1 more in. So there's a difference between having like super speed and maybe like hypersonic speed. Like there's a difference between being able to like run across the country or like run across the world or run through time. So that's the general character creation. Would love to hear some thoughts. I know I talked a lot, but that's the whole 10 minutes right there.
Yeah. No, I love it. I like the way that you, the way that you described, you come out with your sort of dice size per attribute. That's cool. I love something that we keep using your Wolverine as an example, and we sort of touched on this earlier, but like you in your mind, Wolverine is you would probably build him as a scrapper. I would probably build him as like a heavyweight or something like that.
Perfect.
And I love the versatility of
the
archetypes in that way.
Yeah, he can be both.
Yeah,
and that
exactly.
is 100% by
maybe
design.
be a powerhouse. Yeah. Depending, and I mean, I
why...
suppose as well, it can depend on which of his powers you want to focus on, which type of story, you want him to be involved in telling.
Wolverine from X-Men is different to Wolverine from Logan, right? Those are different
100%
characters,
Yes.
different power levels, like all of that, and I think you could argue the same thing for like different kinds of Spider-Man or Batman. Like in different comics, they have different levels of how mighty they are,
Yeah.
and what their focus is skill-wise, Yeah, I think it does a good job of that. I also like having options when I'm making a thing. I like to, because I'm the kind of player who likes to optimize. I want to be able, even in a narrative game, to be like, okay, well, I'm picking this thing and this thing, and this, so I can be really good at the thing that I do.
Yeah.
That's satisfying to me. It's one of the things I miss out on sometimes when I play very narrative games. Is my character is like 3 sentences, and I'm like, okay, is that a character?
I think that's what's cool. Is it should create a character where the situations you get, the situations that you optimize for, are more like real life situations. You might optimize for being good at social media because you're going to be the face of the team. There's not another RPG where you're optimizing not for number, and that's not true. Rather, I don't know of another RPG where you're more optimizing because of decisions you might have to make rather than numbers you might want to get.
Yeah.
In those 2 cases, one of them is, well, I like this more than this, and the other one is, well, 2 is higher than 1, so I'm picking 2. You know what I mean? So the goal would be to make characters the fun part to build, and the mechanics be a little bit less like, oh, and then I add, and then, oh, well, that's clearly better. So yeah, we want that one, because you don't want 4 people to show up with the same thing because it's the best thing, in their mind.
Yeah. And so I love that all of us who have different, exposure to this game, some in passing conversation, others in very deep documents and stuff. I love how we're all kind of same paging it. And some of the ideas that I'm hearing are things that have been discussed, but haven't been like detailed. That's the tricky part is now, okay, cool. Now, how do I write this down? So I am really excited because I feel like I've made a nice leap in terms of what to now write down. One of my biggest flaws as a game designer is having a 2-hour conversation and then remembering what we decided on. When I write it out, I'll hand it to James and Jeff, and they'll be like, this isn't what we talked about. And I'll be like, I thought it was. Like, what's better? We have a couple of questions that I was going to hit on. Midarn says, I wonder if impact dice shouldn't be separate from your attribute score, because you could have characters of similar objective ability but vastly different levels of commitment. So it isn't separate from your attribute score. Maybe I'm misunderstanding. Like Colossus, Beast, and the Thing might roughly be similar in strength, but Beast is for sure a gentle giant, and the Thing for sure a willing scrapper. So I think that's a roleplay choice, though. So
yeah, the main thing is it's just going to look so different because we're playing our character. It's easy to look at comic situations and kind of see like, well, how would that work? And in that case, it's like, well, the beast is a gentle giant, but if a player's playing a gentle giant, they would still be a gentle giant willing to do the things that we're doing in the campaign for social contract reasons, not for rule reasons.
Yeah. Like the impact is the potential impact that someone with that level of power can have, not necessarily, right? Because totally, like Beast could do a lot of damage too. There's also like a superhuman monster potentially.
And that's your decision as a player to.
Right, but Beast like goes out of his way to not do those things, and you can do that too. But you have the potential to do it, you know, if you don't control yourself and you do the things that are dangerous or whatever.
Right.
Exactly, because and just to use his very example, Colossus is a willing person in the sense that he's going to walk up there and he's going to punch the problem. Beast would first try to find an intellect way to solve the problem, and then that's all narrative within the player. That's like me as Beast. I'm struggling with beating people up, what people think of me. I want to use intellect. I couldn't find a good way to do intellect because I'm so good at strength. I'm going to do strength. That, though it's like two mechanics that have created that situation, we've now engineered an arc. I think, as somebody said before, like,
sure.
You forced it in there. Now they have to have that struggle. So,
well, there's two quick things. Keel, I saw you on mute, though. I wanted you to be able to speak to that point.
No, yeah, all good. Me go first?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, Beast, I think his intellect is higher than his might, right? And so that plays into it. But you basically covered what I was sort of going to touch on, James. But that's just raised another dot point here for me to bring up about character arcs, right? Like, is that codified in any sort of way, or is it completely like other games, role play and up to the character? This is, again, another design space I've been swimming in, and I've got some ideas.
I think the way that it is designed now, it will give you narrative guides. So the only codification is that it tells you to consider it and ways to consider it. And this is something that I meant to say way back. Ben mentioned like sessions should be called issues. As of now, sessions are called issues and your turn is called a panel. So like what happens in the panel, I think that's about as far as I want to take it, because I don't want to alienate people who don't read comics with a bunch of lingo where it's like, what am I doing?
Sometimes I'll just throw this in real quick. Like sometimes I see a narrative game and it's exactly as complicated as a crunchy game. They just swap numbers for capitalized terms, you know?
Capitalized terms, exactly.
It's in no way less crunchy. So it's like the more capitalized terms you put in, the more complicated the game gets, you know?
That's very, very true.
Just because it words doesn't make it less complicated.
Yep. It's just a different part of your brain processing that information. No. So I think, Keel, that that might be something for, I'm not sure if you were here for the part where we were talking about sort of that. I think it was right when you jumped in. We were talking about that middle, sort of like after a session, there's like a campaign management sort of worksheet or something that happens. I think that's probably where that would occur. I'm guessing now, as of now, it would be questions and prompts more than it would be scales and charts and like write in the progression or draw a line. It's like, who suffered the most in that session? How did it change them? Who is the most likely to be jaded based on whatever? And that kind of guides you so that when you're picking that next scene or that next adventure, you can kind of write it in and say, oh, hey, well, let's make it this thing because you're tormented about that person that died. So let's make this on the chart that's general about the person who died, you know, something like that, I think.
Yeah, and to extend what Tim is saying, because he's like, we're still coming up with the game, right? But basically, I also have some ideas for that, Keel, and I'm excited to talk about them because we do plan to have something like that. Because in general, we want to make sure that there's not a big gap between beginning players and experienced players of the game. So as many systems as we can to make sure that someone can follow, you know, around some rules to get an arc in a sense. I think that just like D&D, you can get a better one if you know what you're doing and kind of stretch more out of it. But similar to like traits, flaws, bonds, and ideals, it's something for a player that kind of isn't used to it to go, well, I guess I always steal stuff, so I'll probably try to take it. You know, so
yeah. And then one other thing I was just going to mention about the Beast versus the Thing versus Colossus sort of example. My thought now is to also have powers affect impact. so that you feel like your power has more impact, so that if you're choosing beast, if it's something that has to do with acrobatics or agility or something like that, like a physical task, if you choose the acrobat power, you could either be Spider-Man or you could be Beast. But somehow make it so that if you use that power to do a thing, you deal more impact. Like, you also deal an extra D6 of impact of tasks like this, so that Beast would feel like Beast. But if the thing chose super strength, you know, to actually augment that might, it's like when you hit things or destroy them or whatever, you do an extra D6 of impact. Those will feel very different because of the powers that they chose. You might not choose super strength for Beast. You might just throw a 15 or a 17 in there, because Beast doesn't necessarily have super strength. He has augmented or enhanced strength of this like massive creature. So that's where all those dials come in. Like you say, you can make any character any way. You could make, there's an arc now in comics. This isn't really a spoiler because it's on the cover. Thor becomes a Herald of Galactus. How cool would that be to play Cosmic Thor? Like, yeah, I'm just going to make Thor as a cosmic being. All these D20s rolling around. So anyway.
Yeah, and I think that what you described will happen automatically when people make their characters. We're almost like, there are some traps we can fall into by describing characters that exist because people know so many things about them. Not that it's bad, right? It's helping a lot of the things in the game design. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the questions we've had are, well, what about this hero versus this hero? And sort of unequivocally, we're not doing that. You know what I mean? Like, we don't plan to balance it in that way, because you will be able to make heroes that are like other heroes, like Captain America or whatever. But the goal would be that, well, when you make your hero, you decide if it's super strength or enhanced strength, and that, basically it's easy to get bogged down in details of heroes that exist. But those are mostly just for example purposes.
There's a point that Steve made that I think is really interesting, that basically there's a difference between when you're making an archetype, how like powerhouse, scrapper, mystic, paragon, etc. are archetypes. And then if you're from Asgard, you're narratively mythic. So you've got like your skill set, how you do the thing, how you are a superhero, the practical side of your powers and stuff. And then you've got your origin, I guess, like why you have the powers. So like Superman and Silver Surfer and whatever, they all right, they all have these insane top level powers, but their origins are different. So like Superman's an alien and one of them is cosmic and whatever. So those are maybe different, you know, but that's a way to cut down basically how many archetypes you have. So you have like how they do the thing, and then you put on top of that whatever origin you want to flavor it, you know?
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that's what I need to pare down. Same thing with powers, and we can kind of wrap it up now, but to kind of talk about, like, in comic books, you have people who are tough, and then you have people who have invincibility, and then you have people who have invulnerability. So the Hulk is what I would consider invincible, and we saw this in a Marvel tabletop game called HeroClix. The Hulk can still be beat up, and of course, you know, there'll be a lot of comic nerds like myself who would debate this and that, but overall, I think it's generally understood that Superman is more resilient than the Hulk. So I have to figure out, without bloating it, how to differentiate that in the power set. And maybe that's where you park it in the archetype. So you can take invincibility, but in the archetype of powerhouse, it is you automatically gain X as well. So if you take invincibility or whatever, deciding what's the difference between enhanced strength, super speed, and hypersonic speed, and not making it bloated. I don't want all the power lists too. I'm seeing in so many games, they try to break out every little single power. It's like control, gas, control, lightning, control, like, and I'm like, what? Like,
that's some cosmic level analysis paralysis that you get from that.
Yes.
Yep.
One of my favorite examples of what this game would look like, what I imagine this game looking like, is the Avatar: The Last Airbender series. They have all kinds of powers. That doesn't mean their problems are solved immediately. There are people that are stronger than them, things they can't do, but at one point they fill a room with steam to cover somebody. I want a player to be able to say, are those water pipes? I want to fill the room with steam because I know how to do water stuff. That's, you know what I mean? That doesn't solve their problem. That's exactly what it is like, so I imagine it being like if you watch The Last Airbender or Korra, where they're doing crazy stuff and flying around and zipping, and it's cool, and there's still consequences.
You need the right tool to do the thing. And being like having laser vision is not always the right tool, you know?
Right.
And
But some people are afraid to give their players a tool that can do a lot. And you're like, no, let them, like I don't know, this is a bad example, but like lockpick set. You know what I mean? Like being able to pick locks in a game. I don't know, like there should be more things like that. It shouldn't be, you can pick locks and nobody else has any other power like that.
Right.
Right.
Again, that the tools that the players and their characters have just inform the type of game that you're going to be playing. And that's just a way to sort of signpost that and front load that a bit. Like the players, the things they choose, the cool stuff that they choose for their characters up front and as they progress is them signaling to the GM and the group, this is what I want to get out of this game. And this is what some of the cool stuff I want to explore. And whether it's a lockpick, whether it's laser eyes, that's the way it is, you know? And it's a matter of, comes down to GM style as to how empathetic you are to that and pick that stuff up and work that into your prep. Or how many tools the game itself gives you. So, which I mean, basically any game, arguably any RPG that has player choices for their characters and their abilities and things does that. So
and that's what's interesting is the obviousness with which you said that shows that it's like, well, yeah. So having said that, a lot more GM decisions should be based on what the players chose. Whereas when I play D&D, it's extremely rare, if ever, that I have somebody go, hey, what powers did everybody pick? That matter. You know what I mean? There's session zeros and we have patches for that and stuff like but the game was not designed exactly with that in mind. And the goal is to design a game with like, no, it's foolproof. It's bulletproof. If you have a power, you'll get to use it. Like that should be how it is. And so I'm excited to explore that.
Yeah, for sure. It's basically at the moment it's a GM style really. And you can, you know, I don't know if codify is the right word, but sort of weave that into a game's design to sort of encourage that, if not make it seamless and make new GMs, experienced GMs alike, start doing that.
Yeah.
Whether they realize they are or not, you know?
Right, exactly. Giving them the tools. So, yeah.
That's why I like to, simply describe it as lowering the skill ceiling and you know, lowering the skill floor, I guess. I thought it was raising and I got a bit, but yeah, basically like limiting the amount that play can vary. Whereas obviously with D&D, you know what I mean? You can do anything. And to some degree, to me, that can be a flaw.
Yeah. And I think having this discussion has helped me figure out the next phase where I can knock together now what I think is the first draft of the rules. And then it's going to be playtesting and dialing in, which is really fun. So huge thanks to Steve Fillmore, Medarn, Project Nexus, Jeremy Lilly, Jordan, who stopped by. I mean, all of these amazing comments. Shock 1999, really, really great. Ben Buckner. Yeah. Ben Buckner. I was going to say, like Ben, super good.
Table Knights Entertainment, drop some stuff in.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Most of them, so I'm like, all right, well, let's hit them all.
I got to keep going. Big Bearded Nerd dropped by. But to end it, if you have one, if you can grab a D20, there is, and it's totally optional, there is an origin story table. A hero's origin story table. And
one of us is going to do it.
I was just tell me what you roll and I'll tell you what it is.
I think Lloyd might have said one, but I didn't hear him. I got a
8.
6. Oh, 8. Yeah, do 8.
8. You started off as another hero's ward and sidekick, but have since grown into your own, and now your own hero.
Glorious.
Yes.
Yeah, I got a 6 on mine.
You are a legacy hero and have taken on the mantle and name of a hero that came before you. Hopefully you'll do it justice.
That's a great one.
Nice. Do me. I got 18.
18. You were chosen by a more powerful being. Be a wizard, a professor, a demon, an alien, or even fate has granted you powers.
Oh, that's so rad.
Yeah,
And there's the origin thing you were talking about, Lloyd.
Yeah. Yep.
right. And there's like I tried to lump them in, like because right there, if you're a comic reader, if you were chosen, that one that I just read, a wizard chose Shazam, a professor chose Captain America, a demon chose the Demon, an alien chose Hal Jordan the Green Lantern. So like, rather than have one that's like an alien chose you, a wizard chose you, it's kind of like, oh, you get the idea. And then so I did one, and it was, you come from beyond the stars, from a place far, far from here. So it could be Superman, it could be Silver Surfer, it could be, I tried to keep it as general as possible, but also like, so there you go. So that's our super group, a sidekick, a legacy hero, someone who's granted powers, and someone from the stars. So thank you so much, guys. This was really, really helpful, and I'm excited for this game. I think it's going to be a heckin' lot of fun to write and play. So thank you so much. Is there anything, I guess we'll go round robin, starting with Keel, if there's anything you want to say or promote or anything like that.
Sure. Oh, thanks, man. I do have more questions and comments, and can take some of them offline. So thanks
please,
for,
as many as you have.
Let me peek through the window.
Absolutely.
I've got my foot in the door. Yeah, no, thanks so much for letting me join. It was awesome to wake up to seeing this stream and then jumping in. It's awesome discussion as always, and I'm super, pun intended, excited to see more of this game, see that first draft and do some play testing. So
awesome.
Sure, since you offered, I'll do a little plug as well. My name is Keel. I run, write, and play role-playing games. You can check me out on YouTube, all the socials, and patreon.com/runwriteplay.
All right, Lloyd.
This was fun. It sort of a little bit slapped me out of my hangover, so that's good. I've like been forced to think, and that's woken me up a bit. Yeah, I have a YouTube channel. It's called JarlDM, where I run games, and I have a book on drive-through, many books on drive-through, under Scald Publishing. Iskloft is the book. I don't have a Patreon, but these guys all do, so you should back them.
And then, of course, lastly but not leastly, James.
What I wanted to say rather than a plug was that my goal in making this game, and obviously a lot of us are designing it, right? But every time Tim asks me a question, I design to this goal, is to make it as simple as possible and slowly add things, which again, sounds maybe obvious, but it's a very much a software approach, where you build it and you make sure it works, and you build it and you make sure it works. And then furthermore, the concept of being able to add like modules where you can have, like, I am excited to have a part in the game where you have, you decide what costume you're wearing and what colors and the style of it based on the world. But that wouldn't be in every game. So instead of building everything you can do into one system, coming up with a way to go, oh, I want the superheroic game and I really want costumes in there and I want public opinion and social media, but I don't really want moral quandaries. Okay, cool. You now have the mechanics, and as long as you fill in these slots, it'll be that. And so I just wanted to like really put a point on that, because with some really good designers here, I think that that's going to be possible, because like you said, Keel and Lloyd, we're very much playing in the same space and have such similar styles that it's so quickly iterative. And I really like that. It's so much like I have an idea, and instead of having to think about it for a week and come back, Keel says the next thing, or Lloyd says the next thing, and Jeff when he's here, or Tim. That's fun for me. So yeah, that's just really exciting.
No, that's fantastic. So, well, thank you all for hanging out in the chat, and thank you guys for helping me make this game. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to actually play, and I'm excited because this is where I live, man. Like I'm so excited to make how much Matt Click loves Mecha, or like Lloyd, how much you love Vikings, or Lord of the Rings. Like comics is just, that's what I do anyway. So like I was able to write those origin stories by just going, oh, yeah, those heroes would be this one, those would be this one, and just knock down the list like sight unseen. And I just want to say that like something else that's really cool is like what a neat position we're in, where I actually was watching, there's this brilliant documentary. You have to purchase it because I have never seen it the free streaming, but it's called The Secret History of Comics by Robert Kirkman. Highly recommend it. And there's a a comic book expert on there. And so I'm watching it, and as I'm just like, so I tweeted him. I was like, hey, writing a superhero RPG, would you be interested in consulting? He emailed me back, and we have a Zoom next week. And so I'm really excited to like talk shop with someone who's even more proficient than me about things like the golden age versus the silver age versus the modern age, and like what that means to him. And it's basically going to be someone on the outside who I can say, this is what I'm trying to do with the project, and have someone look at it and go, yeah, you probably want to add something like this, or maybe think about these or these kinds of things. So that'll church it up real nice. So I'll let everybody know how it goes. But yeah, I'm excited. Super heroic. So thank you everyone who tuned in, and Keel, I'll take you up on that, man. I will, as much as you want to see and help with, buddy. Same goes for you, Lloyd. I'm like, I'll even share you my raw, nasty doc that is just a cesspool.
Oh, dude, I live for it. Bring it on.
So, killer. Awesome. All right, everybody. I'm going to end this thing with a Tabtarian toast, James, if you don't mind.
May you mend the first break.
May you kill the first snake. And may you conquer everything you undertake. Killed it. Sláinte. Be safe, everybody. Be well, and have an amazing holiday.